Okay, hopefully this works out a little better. Nice. Yeah, I was bugging you like, oh, as soon as we start, you're gonna go to the washroom,
Right.
and it'll just be a waste of time. Now, oops, didn't even turn on the microphone. So off to a wonderful start, and welcome to Portal Mountain Development Meeting number 53.
Again.
Again, yes. So right now we are talking about what we call the heart of the guild. This is part 3 of that, you could say, which is part of a larger series about this book, the arc of this book that I'm writing, that we've been working on, which kind of, as I was saying before, the purpose of the book has to be something that's immediately useful to organization. That's my intuition, what's telling me. I think a facilitator type of role needs to be able to take this book, go organize 100 people at a meetup, like without
Go herd cats.
help you herd yourself, right? It's all about that. Guild facilitation is very different than normal corporate driven facilitation because of course the motive is different, and the motive is a top down and corporate style parlance based on the ego. Which ego is the highest is the one calling the shots.
It's not exactly in reverse, though, for the guild. It's just that the top layer is emergent rather than...
Right, that's still organization.
rather than expressed first and then trickles
Yeah.
down.
So it's not... It's almost like the organizational structure is just an afterthought effect of what people are doing.
It's not the point, it's just the means.
Yeah, so...
Is what it arrives at.
That's what I imagine. So guild facilitation, this book, Portal Mountain, The Quest for Coherence, that's the current working title of it, should be, or has to be, immediately useful for a facilitator to go and organize things, right? So that's why I'm kind of pushing this point about, well, I can't really start writing the book in earnest unless I know exactly where it's ending. We've got the beginning, we've got all that.
Well, you could say you do know where it's ending now based on what you're saying alone. Like, even if it's not like not the most clarified picture right now.
So like
it is the end goal.
I'm trying to drive that.
I don't think you need an immediate we'll discuss it obviously, but I don't think you need those details to start talking about what charlatanism brings to the picture, right?
No, I'm not. No, I'm not gonna just start defining shit like that.
What do you mean?
Okay. So remember we were talking also earlier about how, and we all kind of do this, but you speak without filling in details, assuming things are known because that I mentioned that 3 years ago. You should know that, right? But and for me, I mean, not that you think
but that's not what I was saying.
That's the assumption is that obviously the assumptions exist.
What I'm saying is that there are certain discussions that are not interdependent, so you don't need a very clear view of the guild.
They are for a book. That's what I'm saying.
Hold on,
start writing.
Let me finish the thought. You don't need like the exact construction to hold the exact mental construction of the way the guild is functioning to understand what the charlatan is doing with the layers over here.
But why am I even telling you about charlatans?
Well,
does that imply that there's going to be a facilitator, a facilitator type person who's going to be taking flack? As in, what do you think you know everything?
You're accessing the book and random access.
So again, we've already you bring up charlatanism, and I'm telling you right away that's for a purpose, and this is how you keep the book compelling.
It's for a purpose, but when you're writing about the charlatan,
it's not an academic.
You're not writing on that aspect of it. You build to that aspect after the fact, and by the time you get to it, linearly, you will have those details filled in anyway, because that's how you get that part of the book finished.
Now, I will...
Just knowing where it's going, it should be enough to get it started.
I will completely take down that argument because one method that I want to use is to start with a small essay then build it, just expand. So I could almost start with a paragraph to sum up the book. Expand that into a page. Expand that into a 2,000, a 5,000, a 10.
All right, let's fill in the gaps that the guild structure
So what I'm
needs.
saying is, I need, even to write that first summary paragraph, I can't even start. Do you see what I'm saying?
Well,
Unless we,
I'm not sure I agree with your means to the madness.
So,
but
what is
I'm
the
not-
purpose? Why are we even having Portal Mountain? What is even the purpose? This is what the answer to that is what we are talking about right now today. This bridge to the capitalist platform, to the guild. That when people organize in this way, good things happen and problems get solved.
ideally,
And it doesn't get any bigger than that. We're talking about world order.
It is an idealized.
We're talking about world order.
So when you talk like that, it is idealized, but we need to when we dive into the specifics, we will see quite clearly that it's not going to be about like getting everybody to transform themselves into a single ubiquitous type of human being, right? Which is what usually a lot of dogmas seek to do, normalize people into a single person.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, that
we'll-
top-down,
So
the downloading problem.
So yeah, I know, in the effort to explain how that is not, it's going to be impossible to build that into the structure. Basically, like the entire idea is to prevent that from manifesting itself, and so that's how we go around tackling that problem. As the last couple of times, though, we could probably start with the ontological matrix as our starting platform.
Right. Well, let's get a pen.
So we're discussing.
Maybe we have our old notes here too.
So we're discussing. Yeah. So this would be.
What the hell is that? Diagrams.
Somebody's taking artistic freedom with our work. So this one's upside down. This is more relevant right now.
Yeah.
So do I need
again,
to go into how?
the alpha and the omega of the book?
So do I need to go into how what the square that we're looking at? Right.
I don't know if
In-
we
in
we
the-
don't need details too much.
In this case, it's saying that it's the proximal guild, which is fine. But also the other
I
diagram.
would have another.
The other diagram about the ontological matrix also shows how mythology and agency fit into the ontology. Right? So I don't need to discuss that, do I? Because that bubble and this square are one and the same.
No, I guess I'm more interested in like a narrative chain of like what is it that we expect Portal Mountain to do, assuming it's taken up on a mass scale.
So
What does that look like?
it looks like this manifests in itself within the ontological matrix. By this, I'm talking about what you see in the diagram in the square.
Yeah, right.
That's-
So you're
that's-
talking about guild structure. You're giving an illustration here of these
Yeah.
circles encompassing.
Proximity guilds and the different kinds of proximity guilds.
Right,
Including,
multiple loopbacks, as we've called them.
Yeah, the dots represent the loopback, which is essentially a bubble to itself. Also, you can see examples of people grouping together for specific purposes. And then once that purpose has run its course, the groupings shift and bubbles rearrange themselves into different into a different time of
So look,
structure.
big overall kind of looking like bubbles foaming up.
Mhm.
Sea foam.
Yeah, that's a good way to picture it. It doesn't. The biggest contrast it has, it's not like you don't see a permanent structure happening within the guild. It's always kind of moving and shifting.
So except you
and
do have permanent quote unquote bodies, people, like
Yeah.
people which have, you could say,
But then they disappear out of the bubbles and another person replaces them.
yeah, I get that. But what I'm trying to point at is there is a certain,
Lifetime.
yeah, like persistence,
Yeah.
because demand keeps persisting, and even if, like, let's say people eat food, they get hungry.
But there's no
They're
like.
not always hungry, but that demand is, it's, you could say it's gone, but it's really just coming back cyclically.
Right.
You almost, it's like almost as if it doesn't go away.
Right, but you're not going to be concerned with feeding when feeding is not and being in demand. That's just part of it.
I mean, you
and
don't,
it's supposed to
just
die,
because-
go away, and come back. That's valid too. That cycle is valid for the shape. So just because something disappeared does not mean it disappeared forever either.
yeah,
To,
yeah,
to your point, like with hunger, how it goes away and comes back after you.
right.
A
But
certain amount
then,
of time.
in a way, you're saying that certain guilds basically don't seem to die. Like they go into memory, sleep
Yeah,
mode.
yeah, like
They're
well,
just not active.
right. In a way, that's the case. Remember that we're not looking at a linear sort of time as far as thinking about this kind of stuff.
Yeah, and like phenomenologically, you are experiencing a schedule in which certain guilds come up to presence or whatever activity, and others go back into memory. You could say.
Right. So, even things like, are you part of the fundamental, the natural, or the proximity guild? Well, it depends on what is happening, right? And being in one is like doing an activity of the all three together. So there's always like this. It reappears whenever it's happening, which is why you see a kind of a permanence in the form of, say, this triad of guilds popping up in every bubble in the diagram, right? Like it's manifesting. It's like our DNA. It's not a permanent structure, but everybody carries enough of a sample of it that it reappears all the time. Hell, faces reappear all the time. Do you know how many people look like Paul McCartney for some reason? It's weird.
Yeah.
It's fucking weird.
True. So then, so that's an image of what guilds look like, kind of coming and going. So fundamental guilds, we've got membership is the fundamental of the fundamental guilds.
Membership is the guild that.
So types of guilds here. This box kind of structure is representing this connection of these multiple loopbacks together, sharing the same sort of stack. So the proximal here is that white
is the entire
space.
square. No, it's actually
right.
the entire square. If you follow the dashed lines, it follows all the way through to the back. So
Yeah,
what you
we drew that in,
What-
but
what- so it's a kind of a strange loop in here. So what you see here is inside the proximal guild, which is inside of everybody that's
Yeah, okay,
in there.
hold on. So
and
we've
that's how the bigger
we've-
picture is represented.
we've marked this circle here as proximity.
Yeah.
That's what I was referring to. So I don't know if there's a difference.
This is a proximity guild.
Yeah, that's what I was pointing to this.
So this
Yeah,
speaks,
no,
so
no,
this
no.
speaks to the entire proximal
Talking,
network, right? Which is why everybody's in it. So the full square itself is the proximal guild.
Yeah.
It deals with the networking of
Yeah.
all the guilds.
Yeah, as fundamental guilds.
And it
These are the
itself
three.
and it itself will be one of the circles in here as a more concrete representation at the time. Yeah, it gets loopy, very loopy. The key to understand this is that when you're climbing layers, you're also not climbing layers. You're staying in the same layer. So you never leave fundamental, which is all three of these things together. The very box that we're looking at. right? So you see how the fundamental is divided into 3 columns.
Yeah, that's all I was
That's
trying to
that's
point
this.
out.
That's these 3 columns.
Yeah, that's what I was pointing at.
Yeah, and this
I hadn't
square.
even gotten to the point yet, though, that this is what's being shared in this proximity guild among. So you have multiple loopbacks accessing the same sort of like they're aligning.
Speaking the same language, basically.
This because this is that they're lined up. This would be like your specific protocols and stuff
yeah,
for what
how to do it.
for how to do this bubble, and then this is just like the fact that you remember.
This is just the fact that how this works, right? So this tells you
How what works? What were you
how
circling?
this whole thing. These 3 columns
Right,
are
yeah.
these 3 columns.
Yeah.
So this is just telling you how this
so what
bit
it's
works inside
what
of
it's
itself.
saying is that there are proximity guilds in which people are sharing
And this is
natural guilds.
And sorry, this is actually a picture of this whole square, so that inside this triad of people, these 3 people here, they look at that and they get a representation of this, so they know what other guilds are here. All of these. That's how they access it. It's in this bubble. That's what the database is of all the guilds. Including itself. Like this is still correct. It's going to include this circle inside of it. So it's nested that way.
Pardon? Yeah, so anyways, that's all like I'm sure confusing as fuck, and I can take my time definitely to write out those details. But so like this bridge idea again, driving towards the omega of the book. So this bridge to capital. We had another diagram drawn. Which maybe it's on the back of one of these. Anyways, just of that like the guild membrane. So, and like I want to talk in generally, like more generally, like not just diving into exact specifics.
Okay.
Or try to anyways, because I need like the narrative arc of the pieces, how they come together, right? And like I have ideas, I have an idea, it's just I think we need to be critical and kind of fill in gaps on the overall, like the arc.
Sure. Yeah, I'll do my best. It's tougher for me to not give detail because detail is all I see.
So
I'm
like
not sure.
just
So I'm not sure where I need to draw
like
a line.
I just want to imagine it as if like somebody watching this meeting would be able to have enough pieces to put together a picture on the overall. You know what I mean? So like for example, we were talking about the ontological matrix.
Yeah.
That to me gives a vision of humans interacting in the world together through media, which is necessarily like kind of digitized.
Do you hear the song in your head too? Matrix.
Yeah,
When they're walking down the street,
for sure.
woman in the red dress. That's what I envision. People everywhere in New York.
Yeah. So that's how we, off the bat, quickly with each other, interact with each other through an environment. This is that setting that idea up.
Right.
Next, we have, I guess, well, people are organizing through that, right? And so we set up 2 major ways that organization happens. One is through the ego and its market, and the other is through the whole-on.
Yeah, the whole-on model.
Right. And there's no corresponding. Is it? So I remember like whole-on and ego are kind of equated, but there's no market equivalent on
The problem with
whole-on side, or you just call it? It's just
the
whole-on?
problem is that ego is like a stunted hold-on instead of building up into something more.
Yeah.
Into something
so
more.
It is a whole-on.
It,
you could say.
It has like some of the makings of the whole, except it more works like a cancer, in that it just makes more of itself.
Right. I would almost put just organization here, like the idea of organization as a whole-on as the next whole-on.
So
right?
a good analogy is to how to picture it. If you're picturing something that's progressing towards, like more complexity and becoming more evolved, if you will. Ego is this like thing where that very same process is just like circling back on itself, and it just can't seem to do anything except just become bigger at that one isolated spot.
Mm-hmm.
Right, so that's like the progression stunt is halted.
Right. Yeah, and that's the big change in stacking of holons. You're having unique holons at each layer up to a point where you hit ego as the holon, and it's no longer holons at that point. It's ego on top of ego.
Yeah, it's a perverted sort of
And we're just asking why.
expression of it.
We're just saying, hey, what's up with that?
Don't you just not like it? Well, yeah, the rest really follows from.
Do you hate the problem?
That's where I was going for.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's like that's kind of the scenario that we've been laying
There's
out
many
this entire
aspects
time.
to the scenario, many angles.
Well, yeah,
and
there's a reason why we arrive at it in the first place.
So, like, we're taking this matrix, walking the matrix with Morpheus,
and we're slapping guild into it.
and yeah, so
We are seeding it with.
So one of the buildings on the street, instead of Neo's work, let's say another building, maybe Kitty Corner, you enter that building, which is organized differently, right? So like, this picture needs to be kind of, the pieces needed to build this picture. I need to make sure that they're in place for remember we were talking about corporate structure, first the natural guild structure, and then we can go into corporate structure. Like, we were kind of just, you were kind of given a narrative layout.
Yeah, because the corporate structure has to be first and foremost reflective of what we just showed on the bubble diagram thing, because like that's what gives it the means to deal with. Well, it's also part of the natural guilds, that corporate structure. So that's kind of they're kind of part and parcel. Like you have one so the middle column where it has the ladder.
Mm-hmm. They do reflect.
So there's
other.
one of the guilds in there. It's called the Economy Guild, and that is the Agile Economics, which sets up the institute and the corporation as entities in the concrete, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's already to be understood in the context of this bubbling up situation.
Right. So we're setting up like a whole bunch of little routines,
Yeah.
of which that then can come together in an actual, call it quote unquote, organization. Utilize that language, that kind of alphabet of organization,
Mm-hmm.
using that alphabet, the natural guilds, to then make
To
existing
supply up for the
structures.
demands that are popping up.
Yeah, like this idea of an organization. What is an organization? So the idea of what is a guild? It's a heavenly object, right? It's not in front of you. You don't see it, but it's there.
Much like the system.
Right. So you walk into this building. There's obviously the guest lounge.
So really, what why we're so stuck on this as like flies on shit is because from that perspective of something got stunted over here with ego. You know, you got life, 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 and then you just got this circling around. Our
Mhm.
simple argument is this is not where we should be. We should continue on the previous, so to speak, legacy, because
What are you,
that
conservative?
it's not that. It's just that you know, life brought us this far. Who the hell are we to tell? To say, hey, no, we're gonna take
Yeah,
the
right.
reins now.
Who here is actually the hubristic one?
So yeah, like the idea is that there was nothing wrong with what was happening to begin with. What we're fixing actually is transforming everything to shit. So what are we doing with ourselves? And so yeah, long and short of
Mhm.
it.
Yeah, so that's good. I'm I'm kind of interested in top level general, because I feel like although we assume, and you never know, it's hard to know what's really been effectively communicated, but like I think we assume way too much, obviously.
Well, this is all top down generated. Anytime it's spoken, anytime it's conceptualized and then written down, it's a top down. It just what it is that came from the top could potentially be emergent or part of the self feeding cycle.
Mm-hmm.
That's the only difference. There's still mythology in both cases. There's still um,
Eons into his 33 myths.
oh yeah,
He's calling it a total page turner. Yeah, I still didn't read it. I feel like I know.
like you wouldn't agree with the author 100%. I don't. Some of his conclusions I think are motivated more in the way he sees things, more ontologically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's
So
typical. You always have to take, and it's so hard to remove yourself from that.
yeah,
But that's also what kills projects like that because they can then be dismissed wholesale.
no, there's enough in there to piggyback on
I
it
mean, by the any pundit
successfully.
or whatever who would want it on political grounds, like,
Like the entire shift from thinking that trade supplanted barter, or the
right? Yeah,
currency
that's
supplanted barter. The idea that civilization has been running with that for as long as it has, that's not exactly correct. Those are the kinds of key things that I take away from books like that.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
Because there is something to that way of looking at the situation. It makes much more sense, for one, if you compare it to actual human behavior, not the crap we're told human behavior is.
So this building in the Matrix, kitty corner from Neo's work.
You know what I'm picturing? I'm picturing in the second one there is a building in which has like these. It's a hallway with all these doors, and the doors lead to like every part of the Matrix.
Mm.
That's the only building I'm picturing right now.
Yeah.
The key holder,
Yeah. The architect stuff.
yeah.
I like the first one. I think I'm pretty sure I saw like the second and there's a third
Yeah.
maybe, but I never like kept rewatching them or anything. The original one I've seen many times.
Well, the second and third one don't make you think. There's no. The first one is subtle in the sense that it's just the question, look, whether the reality in front of you is what you think it is. The other one's already established that fact, so you're not wondering any of this stuff. You're just like, oh, what happens to our beloved heroes?
Yeah.
Which kind of isn't the same thing anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But yeah, the
It
first.
kind of, yeah, right. It kind of becomes much more like concretely fantasy.
Mm-hmm. But the first one definitely in its establishing of the whole prison that you can't smell, taste, or touch.
Yep.
That's so much of a homage to, samsara, that you can't even you can't ignore that.
Yeah. It's a great movie. I like using the metaphors where possible. After all, that one message has been pinned for like half a year or more.
Nobody reads it, I don't
Morpheus
think.
quote.
Literally nobody reads it.
Well, there's anybody who looks at the chat sees the pin at the top, and they see at least the first few words, right? So there you go.
Hint, hint, nudge, nudge, it matters.
Yeah. So this other building, this is the way I'm trying to focus our narrative. We walked into this guild. There's obviously a
What's a kitty corner?
guest lobby that's like straight across angle, like not on the other side of either street, but complete opposite. That's what I was kind of imagining. I forget. I think Neo's building was probably on a corner. Right. If his building's there, then this would be
Gotcha.
that one, conveniently with a certain symbol in it.
It's an ancient symbol.
Yeah, so like why not kind of ride along, piggyback on certain right. So if this is the Neo's work and this is the guild building or the gilding.
This is where we be gilding.
That's what the Portal Mountain temples are called. Gildings.
Nice.
There we go.
Our gildings. Yep.
You heard it here first.
I love it.
So you walk in, there's a guest. Obviously, then we get into like participant, like coherence theory, and like Portal Mountain structure itself theory, like as far as the lobby, right, being open to all. And so like it all becomes ambiguously
open to all who adopt the etiquette.
I knew you'd come up with it
Because there's a basement for hostility.
Right. You go down the trapdoor. Just stand over there.
A little to the left.
Can you take 2 steps to the left? Yeah.
Well,
So we'll give them everybody gets a membership card, but you have to have your picture taken, and there's also a trapdoor right at the spot where you have to stand.
I think it matters specifically because without that one little thing, that injection of feedback observation on that smallest of the smallest layers of entry, there is no participation in anything. Like, that's what makes one a participant. That etiquette is like the first hook of, if you agree, then you're participating.
Sure.
It's really that simple. It's how you participate.
Right. Yeah. So this is also grounds for, you could say, exclusion. Those who do not.
But it would be
up.
self-excluding in that case.
Right.
Because you're clearly not participating and or actively are hostile to said
Right. Yeah. So I mean, like,
etiquette.
we've got all this stuff figured out for years. We've been at it with the Telegram chat, Portal Mountain lobby, with our peeps for years now. So, but I mean, like, it all has to come together, all of it. Like, that's the point of like a checkpoint, a book. Like a milestone, and it has to have a purpose. Yeah, sure. Um, a purpose, if you want, and that purpose would be to. So, what is this building, this gilding? What goes on there? And um, like I was imagining, like like open spaces and like co-working spaces and all this kind of stuff. Like,
So I guess to add to the picture, you go into it, and the first thing that you should probably understand is that you've entered into something to this effect, right? You enter the building. This is what it means to have a grouping of
right,
guild in any given moment.
right,
Centered to that is this structure. So right off the bat, if you enter this guild, if you enter this guild, if you enter this guild, they all have this at their kind of core.
yeah, of course. So not only that, but each building would have its own guild, each gilding, like definitely, because you're binding to physical matter,
Yeah, for sure.
right? This is the environment.
But just because it's this guild today does not mean it's the same guild tomorrow. There's also that kind of.
But and then we're getting
cycling
back
through.
to our previous discussion. Just because something goes to sleep doesn't mean it's disappeared.
Right.
It's in memory still.
Yeah, we're not
Just
talking about
because
what
the
happens Thursday.
lights are out, lights are out.
Yeah.
At whatever time the building is shut down, quote unquote.
So this is
doesn't mean there's no demand for that guild.
Yeah,
Right.
this is what the meta schedule is really for, is to determine, okay, what is necessary to sort of wake up, if you will, to accomplish this. What
Mhm.
needs to go to sleep, and so on and so forth. What new things need to
Right.
be born, what needs to be eliminated entirely, like all of that. That's
Mhm.
and each moment to moment is going to create a different picture based on what had already happened. So yeah, the front desk, if you will, is essentially a way to access this portion, which is a way to learn how to interact with everything here,
Mhm.
right? So this is your how-to manual within the structure, so that you can already begin to participate.
Right.
So this is like
Like protocols.
Yeah.
And this basically this sets up your ontology of the space.
yeah. So
You're
right off
learning
the
what
bat,
what objects exist in this environment.
yeah. So right off the bat, you see that this thing is divided here into these three columns, and the first column is how these three columns are divided. So you get to so the first thing you do is you learn about how this is structured by being here.
Okay, yeah, like so you're now you're already getting into like we're probably already a few guilds deep even.
Well, it's a little it's mutually emergent, like mutually.
Because now imagine that that sharing of the model, let's say, is like the prime guild, if you will, like that. None of it would even exist without the education,
Yeah.
sort of.
So right off the bat, you're told how to use this thing that you're immediately encountering within each guild. Is how do you make use of that?
And you're assuming that you don't already know.
Right, which jumps
So
in,
not everybody needs to be
and so it's
in the process, like learning at this level or whatever.
yeah, and it and the second thing it does, right, aside from telling you about these three columns, within the first column you have the second column already, which talks to you about how to utilize all the protocols that interact with the guild members, right? That uphold it all together, all the way through to the economy. That's the agile economic setup and all of that stuff, and then the worldwide with a wider view, access to the rest of the network itself included.
Right. Okay. So there's obviously mechanisms behind what you seem to be. You seem to be talking about like inter-gilding networks.
So within each guild, you already have more guilds. You have the fundamental guilds, by definition, basically,
Yeah.
because it's in the guild.
Right, and that's the top-down aspect,
Right.
if you will.
Right. That's really all there should be to it. The rest of the discussion would be once you reach up the ladder to the economics guild, which is like somewhere in the middle. At which point it gets a bit more granular as to how do you control for these structures and how do you make sure that they are communicating between each other using
Right.
using this style.
So, what you're referring to is like a core set of natural guild protocols, going from the bottom education up to sentient machine,
Exactly.
which gives you basically the generic structure of these little circles, like these loops.
Hmm. Call it foam. I like foam.
Mm-hmm.
The foam.
So, but within that, we also did start describing. So, like when I say, as I mentioned it just now, like in the most fundamental way that these natural guilds, the protocols for that, there's like a core structure, right? This is kind of aside from that fact when we're talking about a specific proximity guild doing certain things. You're gonna again see these core protocols, but core to that guild behavior, right? You'll have sets on top of sets.
It's a set of
protocols.
It's a set of constraints that still retains the fact that it's a guild and allows it, therefore, interface with other guilds seamlessly, essentially. Maintain the same emergent behavior.
And so this is what I would classically call like a core protocol or a core set of protocols.
The DNA. I usually refer to it as the DNA.
Right. So those are assumed, but then on top of that, what are we doing with the system?
Yeah.
That's where more of really the content is going to be a lot more content aside from this just tiny thread.
So to do that, we just need to jump into agile economics. We can go the route of explaining how you built up to it, but I don't think that's relevant to what you and I need to discuss. That's something.
Let's keep. I wonder if this
because what we'll have to do is have to go this way.
I wonder if this ontological matrix metaphor. It seems pretty handy, like the building, walking into the gilding. Because I think it keeps bringing up like new questions, right? If we assume that what we're doing, our work, can be physicalized, manifested in like a building or whatever,
Hyperstationalized.
what does it actually look like? And now I want to step back from this imagery of like Neo's work, giant skyscraper, and let's say it's another giant skyscraper or whatever, but it's the gilding, or whatever it's going to be.
It's got a quasi Scientology like symbol, except it's not, just to mock them.
Whatever it is, that's fine too.
And it's obnoxious and
So,
right.
to step back from that a little bit, I want to acknowledge that even on a neighborhood scale, you can have out of a strip mall or something like even a basement.
Well, yeah. Look at how unassuming
So,
these
like,
bubbles are. Really,
people have run businesses out of their basement, right?
Look at this bubble right here. It literally lifts 2 of the 3 individuals from this bubble, just for its own thing. One of which is also in another involvement altogether. So like,
Right. So you could see this looks like it's emergent out of a number of different.
No, it's whatever these three are doing. That's grouping them together. It's whatever
Right.
these 3 are doing.
Yeah, I guess. But I was thinking, like, I bet you can't do this without these 3 bubbles. Somehow.
Well, no.
Like, that's
if this
maybe
bubble
why they're related.
if this bubble disappears, it's still the case. It doesn't have to be. In fact, those.
But it could
can
be created. That's what I'm saying. It could be structured like that. Like you'll see all
Oh yeah,
kinds
you
of
can.
dependencies.
Just like with the soap bubbles, so they come merge together and create a bigger bubble. This can happen with this. Like, imagine all of this unwinds, and now you got a 5 dot
Right. So anyhow,
guild.
I know, like, for me, this is always, it's uncomfortable, ambiguous, like imagining kind of stuff, right? But
But this should be concrete enough.
that's not. some squiggles on paper.
Person, group. The
It's
rules.
great that we have that.
And there are rules.
I think we've effectively used that chart even today to, explain that most people could kind of get a feel for it. We're talking about
Right.
organization of people, how people organize.
So what I'm trying to get at is where can we take this from being too ambiguous to showing a concrete picture where this is showing up? Because,
Right.
for
Well,
example,
we just have to keep imagining this.
me and you,
the
for
gilding.
example, are sitting here, right? Like you could pretty much imagine that, or like this, with say this being Lisa, or and this being whatever, like Cohen or something like that. Do you know what I mean here?
Yeah, it's a generic picture.
Grouping.
Right.
Then the groupings come and go,
And
also the people,
they go to sleep, they wake up.
and also the people come and go from the groupings, without the groupings coming and going.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. Yeah. Without you don't really need specifics to kind of get it. What we're pointing at is organization of people through a shared DNA in a way.
Mhm.
Not only a core shared, but even within each of these different loop regions, you have subsets of shared.
Yeah, like speaking the same language, basically. That's a good metaphor for it. Even though we're all in different, say, family houses and different workspaces, we all use English to shout words at each other.
And it's just that every household even has its own organizational standard. Is represented by that box in the middle stack. Right?
And however it may vary, it's always recognizable in another household, provided it's an actually structured one and not going completely to shit.
Right. Should be recognizable.
There's parallel, like washing dishes, like taking shoes off, like
Yeah.
wiping the counters. Like
Yeah,
there's
things
always
happen for a reason. There's a shared economy just based on the fact that we have bodies, right?
Mhm.
That tells you alone, that household kind of
It's a shared
organization should be similar
Yeah.
because we all have bodies.
Gross, disgusting bodies.
Pardon. And we have to say pardon me. Yep.
Okay, so I think the rest of if you understand immunity, then I don't know if it makes any sense to really climb it up guild by guild until we reach economy to discuss economy, because economy is what we really are trying to discuss. So we can fill in those details later, but they're not crucial to any of the components of the agile economics, because they're just elaborations on immunity over and over and over again in different ways.
Now hold on. There is already an economy. There's already a demand. You could kind of say that guilds have demand. Like even the education guild, there's a set of demands that come with that. Otherwise, the guild doesn't exist.
Just because you're building up to them does not mean they're not coming down to you.
Yeah, right.
So don't worry about that part. So the build up is just to make sense out of why certain things come at a certain layer rather than before.
So I think we can probably keep going with towards the corporate structure stuff. And again,
that's what I'm trying to get to.
I want to keep this visualization of the gilding that are imagined in the ontological matrix. So let's keep it all mysterious. It doesn't matter for now, other than the fact that there's this lobby, sort of, or like a front desk.
We haven't really even defined anything else. So what would you want it to do? So, okay. Let's purpose this building for our conversation.
Basically, let's just go by floors and say the first floor is like intake, but I think it also would have the lobby. That would just be the general thing. And then in the front area, you'd have a front desk, right? Somebody who's able to kind of quickly assess hostility and participation, right?
They'll have the trapdoor switch.
Right. So now this kind of makes me...
I'm joking, of course. I'm not serious.
No, it's for real. The trapdoor. But so
Mr. Bernstein.
the lobby, the Portal Mountain lobby, we include guest participant, right? Or guest coherence. In that, I mean, there's kind of like an encouragement towards participation.
With the etiquette, yeah.
But even etiquette, like, that's hard to assess, right? Like,
Well, it's not hard to assess if you see a person trying. The idea, like, it's not about. It's not like a test. It's not a test of character, right? It's more like. Well, I guess it would be.
to me,
in a
okay,
way.
so here's the thing. We assume participation, basically, unless otherwise
Evident.
Therefore, there's basically the lobby would have participant and guest there's like guest is anybody, right? So, however, there needs to be somebody watching an eye for less than guest, quote unquote, i.e. hostility.
For etiquette.
Right. So it's like the security guard, basically.
So it's about feedback, right? If the feedback is please use different etiquette and the same shit repeats over and over again, it's clearly a hostile stance towards the etiquette itself. It is an expression of hostility. Like
Right.
a guest by virtue of not knowing anything about the etiquette is can be told what the etiquette is, and if they attempt to use it, they're already participating. If they attempt to then ignore it,
Mm-hmm.
or that's hostility, and if they don't get it, that's still guest.
And so, like, security guard isn't really the right word, because it's more like, I think, the purpose of, let's say, a host or whatever.
Yeah.
You know, like, their purpose is, if they feel like it's their first time, right? It's basically greeting. If it's their first time, then they need to be given the opportunity to review the structure of what's
Yeah.
going on, right? Don't let anybody in without first giving them that information, right?
Well, you can let them in, and tell them that the information for what this is, where it is. Like, you don't give something here, throw this away. You know what I mean? That's the other component of it.
No, you know what? I think I'm disagreeing, because I'm just maybe.
They have to have an interest in receiving as well, is what I'm saying. There needs to be both sides have to
I think
have
I'm seeing into the future,
a
because
kind of connection.
anybody who would walk into such a gilding.
They're already curious, hopefully.
Yes, but there is a membrane going on,
Immunity, yeah.
right? And
Because that's the other thing. They're gonna come up against the immunity part.
like, I know what you're saying, that it's not like, oh, you have to sit down and watch this 10-minute video, like some bullshit.
Download our
But
training
there
videos.
has to be the connection at the very least. Do you understood that I told you where to look for help, and how things are, what's going on?
Well,
here?
this is why I like etiquette, because it's such a simple instruction. It doesn't ask you to look for information before you're interested in it. It just says, okay, treat everybody as their own master, as a guest would in somebody else's house. Simple enough to follow, makes sense, and already is an established way of seeing.
But what if they
the
just walked
disposi-
by and they didn't even hear you?
Well, that it just means a failed interaction. Like, we don't need to complicate
Well,
it.
here, no, we
Just
do, like.
No, it just means that a different interaction is necessary for it to be established. Like,
Right.
the
I think
conversation didn't happen.
That type of stuff would be far and few between, but what I'm saying is, like, you're walking through a membrane, quote unquote, into a guild. Therefore, there is something gets triggered.
Yeah,
There's no way around that. No, you don't just people wander into a space.
Yeah, there is it's like wandering into a different country. Like, there is a different language to speak.
Mm-hmm.
And you at least should know about that and where to find the dictionary.
And
for
moreover, this etiquette could be easily printed and displayed.
Well, the etiquette is like a small, tiny sample of that information, hopefully enough to whet your
Mm-hmm.
wet your nose with.
Right. Yep.
And with that, I'll
Good
be
time.
back.
Good time for a break.
I shall be back.
Been going for almost an hour there, and we'll be right back. You is back, we is back. And what did Eon say? About 33 minutes? Yeah. Well, you read myths.
Yeah, I just wanna.
So our
I
gilding.
just missed all of that Eon conversation here.
The gilding. Now we have to think of this. So I think I left my beers. It's probably almost done anyways. The gilding. We have to be able to think of it potentially as a skyscraper, potentially as a unit out of a strip mall, potentially as a basement, sort of like as you would think, like some people convert to a business, like do a basement business.
Yeah.
Right. Oh, sorry.
I need one too.
Right. So it has to be whatever we're thinking. We need to kind of think in those terms. What you have is a physical environment that's being managed by the guild, basically.
Yeah, that was never it was never something I actually questioned as a premise. I think that the
we're filling it out.
Yeah, the
We're just
painting of the
expanding.
picture of what should take place in such a structure, though, so such a permanent structure,
Mhm.
needs very meticulous understanding of how impermanent its utility is. So there needs to be like this. It's almost like a contradictory system if you don't um, s- iron out the small pieces that build up to it.
Mhm.
So now that we have done that, we can really step it up by jumping into agile economics, and that we can do through bringing up the spreadsheets that deal with that, because that's really how that's going to be divided up.
As to what goes on there.
Yeah.
Right. So we've got this sort of, call it generic environment space
Of guilds, yeah.
being managed by the guild, which is to sort of impose the core of the guild into the space.
Now
So
we're
that,
gonna-
that implies an education and a learning of what the guild is and how to use it, all that kind of stuff.
So that's what we covered just now.
Mhm.
And now the secondary
The
part
specifics
is
of what's going
how
on.
the fuck do you do that in connection with the real world, like you're saying.
Right. In other words, like that the space is being utilized well and managed and all that. Especially, I mean, like that the what the space can supply is being demanded. How you connect that together, right?
Well, more-
Demanded in the immediate
More like the
community.
picture of how life doesn't waste space. Like everything in life has a kind of a utility, even if we
Right.
don't know what it is.
Yeah, and
To-
yeah,
To continue on with that sort of picture.
right, right, and it's not like this top-down communist idea that, oh, now your building belongs to the people now or whatever, and then it's dictated what goes on there, etc.
Well, the one thing about these systems they all have in common is that reduction of the human being into a single entity, right? Like that's what economy does. Yeah, typical economy. There is only one agent, right? That every person is. Like everybody is doing it, maximizes their input and minimizing their output, or some
Sure.
simplified picture of that effect of the human being. This doesn't do that. It asks everybody. Etiquette is already a step towards away from that.
Right, right,
In that it asks
Yes.
you to respect the mastery of the other person to begin with.
right. And like you mention often, the mastery over oneself, over one's own body, the master of your
Mhm.
domain. This is why we should obviously approach others as a master. They are a master, and vice versa. And this opens up. So like when you're talking about a single agency of the ego in the market, what you introduce here is a opening of potential of what each person could be, if only we would treat each other that way. With
Yeah.
who
And
are you?
The opposing force would have us completely erase that from the equation and have no etiquette whatsoever. Everybody's on the same useless, not useless, meaningless level, if you will, replaceable, just another cog in a machine.
Right. So we all know that that's not the way that human organization has to be, and again, we're not arguing for anything going away. In fact, we need to be interfacing with
Yeah.
the market as it is. So in other words, we need to interface with the fact of ownership, right?
Yeah.
So bottom line, any of
Which
these,
is-
any environment is owned, right?
We have that. We have that also tucked away in our vocabulary, not vocabulary, our glossary, as a kind of an inversion of the state and machine archetypes. It's so we have like agency owners, classes. Yeah, we have archetypes for classes, and what I noted in it is that it's a kind of like a taken this natural structure that we saw in the guild when we were formulating that, and just kind of twisted it on its face and used it in its reversed sort of way, which allows for the runaway effect to take hold, and reification going in one direction but not the other. So it's like,
I'll admit I got lost there.
the bigger point is that even the system itself is a reflection of the model. It's just doing something in a very backwards way, where order is chaos and chaos is order. It got switched, if you will, and that different setup of it, that different aspect of it, is what creates more runaway. The opposite effect of what we want, the runaway effect. We don't want the runaway effect. That's what it's pushing the model's constituents
And
towards.
again, so like when we're
So it's
looking
all
at
part of it.
when we're looking at life built up through history of holon evolution, holonic emergence, and we find, you know, at each layer we're having holon interacting, and then we have the ego. That's a complete, like, a paradigm shift where, and I was just trying to get at what you said about the inversion of that suddenly ego as a non-holonic thing by definition is impermanent, sort of, right? Like you've taken the content out to be king instead of the structure and the timeless order itself, right? And that's kind of this inversion that allows for organizational structures which function like cancer on their own end.
And it's an inversion of perspective, not necessarily of like profound universal shift or anything like that. And that simple reversal of that perspective sets the stage of neglect over and over and over and over to happen over and over and over again. At first, nature swallows it because we're an insignificant species, but this is not the stage at which this is true anymore. Simple as that.
Perspective.
Well, this is why all we're doing is like changing the perspective on
Right.
how to reorganize ourselves. Again, we're
it's
not
kind of
doing
a
anything new.
Perspective on reality itself a bit, like as far as the holon, using the holonic model, it really demands a shift and an opening in what things can mean, in meaning gets exploded by a holonic model. Basically, it gets untrapped from these structures, ego structures and all that.
Etiquette is more or less just forcing the point in the most subtle
Right.
way.
Yeah, by setting up that loop where
You're
treat them as
where
a
you're
master,
looking up, where you're looking up, basically.
treat the other as a master, but then when you reverse it, they're treating you as a master.
When you picture approaching somebody as a master, don't you always imagine something along the lines of looking up to that person, like they have a
right.
that's not it's not a coincidence. It's intentional in its imagery.
Right. Don't you notice our camera angle? Seeing up our nostrils.
Yes, look up at us. No, that's more of equipment.
Yeah. I suppose I could turn that drawer. I might give it a couple extra inches.
We've
but
never needed that though,
Yeah.
and I don't
That's
know.
fine.
It just seems like we're talking to a person on the same level as us.
it's close, yeah. It is close. So guild organization. Is that phone noisings?
Yeah, but it's not important.
Somebody messaged me. Do you know who that is?
Oh shit! It's today, isn't it?
Yeah.
Happy
It's
birthday,
my
man!
birthday.
I actually knew it. I just forgot that today was the 18th.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, mine's in the week.
Yep.
Ish.
29,
No, that's my mom.
28, 30.
Yeah.
There we go.
Tell your mom happy birthday too. 'Cause
Will
you guys
do.
are on the same day, right?
One of those numbers. Numbers are numbers. Yeah, so you're mentioning agile economics is where we'd get into, okay, so you've got this kind of building setup, this gilding. what is the business that's going on there?
Yeah, how do you translate all this bubbly stuff into a solid corporate, recognizable entity?
Right.
Doesn't get her done, except I need to take another look.
Sure.
Sorry.
It's all good.
It's no beer.
Be right back. Where were we? I'm gonna stand in front of the heater. Watching Jenya live, texting on his phone.
I'm not texting, I'm looking at my payment being declined for something.
Oh no. That did no good. No good, man.
I'm more confused because I don't know what has been ordered.
Yeah, it'll get figured out. So yeah, guild. So I think we were gonna pull up the spreadsheets.
Yep.
Pretty soon. I think that's what it's
We
looking like,
should.
where it's going.
We should, because
And I just want to make sure we connect this image of the gilding in the ontological matrix to that. If we can just keep the thread going, then
well,
it'll be
you'll start to see the connection when you see how it's connected to the different natural guilds.
Do we have those spreadsheets? Because we haven't looked at them in a while.
Also,
Very
the other
long
thing
time.
that was utilized in the thinking there was the coherence and
Mhm.
temperament chart, or table, rather. So a lot of the
Yeah, we filled out actually like massive structure, like a kind of default structure. So I know it's in Excel. Do we have pictures of it though? I'm sure we probably do or did, but
this is the safer route, yeah. Ooh, resumes.
oh yeah,
Trying to find a job.
templates. No, just start a new document. Templates.
Maybe Google knows something you don't.
I don't know. It's been there for years. Maybe they do.
It's like slowly nudging you. It's like,
Eh.
hey, get a different job. Nah, they love you here.
I think so. I know so actually. 'Cause I'm just that awesome.
Look for documents not owned by you.
Because
They're not owned by
you
you.
made them.
The answer.
The answer. It sounds so compelling. How do you...
Oh, yeah. Spreadsheets. Guild institution, corporate structure. There they are. Top.
Okay, alright, so that's fine. We can pull this up. I'll need a monitor though. To plug my phone in or something. So, which one should we be looking at? Corporation, president. Just trying to review some of this. Corporate persons. Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. Like this is all wild. Like it's related to like stuff that we're familiar with, but
You haven't touched
we
on this for so
came up
long.
with like all these different roles and stuff. Now, okay, so just reviewing here. So, we've got some stacks here. Obviously, significant up top, fundamental down. Mediation requirements. And these are guilds per role. Roll across the top. Yeah, there's a lot here. So what I suggest, hopefully,
I need to refresh my own
hopefully,
memory here.
I know, but let's.
So this is like the offices, remember? With the person and the there's a corporate person and the.
Now, should we maybe try connecting this to that other chart that's in that pile?
Which one?
The what do you call it? It's like the corporate offices or whatever. We like
That you don't have?
removed it.
Because they're connected to the corporate offices. Oh, the
I
archetypes.
saw it there. Yeah, it was there. Like, wasn't it? Maybe I'm just not sorting. Oh, it's behind. On the back. Right. So, I want to kind of try to just connect this
This is
idea.
repeating sovereign, cabinet, ministry, governments. It's on the spreadsheet.
Yeah. Right. So, These are structures. They're stacks, right?
Right. So the connecting tissue here is the archetype stack.
And so we've already kind of gone into, although we didn't really look at or pull up the natural guilds themselves, right?
Yeah, but like I said,
But I think we're jumping
We're
ahead
to
into
one of them.
the more like concrete.
we're going to describe only one of them,
Which one?
economy.
Now,
Ag-
right,
Agile
okay.
economics.
Right, and we want to get there because we're assuming that we're actually skipping over a lot. We're assuming that this whole management structure for this gilding space is in place to do some
Yeah, that's-
some minimal maintenance.
So the few guilds that not predate, but the few guilds that lead up to economy would take care of the more fundamental aspects of these.
Right. Okay. And that's
So you
that's
already
our
have those
connection.
yeah, you already have those constraints in
So we
place.
should really pull that up, that chart table.
Don't you want pop-ups?
What?
Pop-ups? More pop-ups?
This one. So the guild stack.
Mm-hmm.
Education, immunity, environment, technology, data, economy. So you're saying, like,
We're saying we can...
economy is where we're kind of branching out into what gets filled into the space. Really, what are the needs being met? Even though we're acknowledging 100% that there is an economy, there's
These are all
demand.
activities that you can do within that space,
You
but
can
it's not...
you can view any of these guilds preceding economy as having their own supply demand or demand supply
requests.
setup.
Yeah. Angles. Offices.
Right. Okay, so why don't we just quickly, just because this is going to be a blank hole in the story, this gilding in the ontological matrix,
Mm-hmm.
one of the first things we've been talking about education, the fact of etiquette being taught, quote unquote, as like one of the first things, like that's all. Like someone comes in, there's somebody needs to be making sure that that protocol, they've entered the a membrane of the guild.
Mm-hmm.
There needs to be some baseline of education, right? So that's why that makes perfect
And
sense.
participation.
So can we step up to immunity and what are we, like one of the things was a contingency. If someone doesn't see or doesn't seem to understand or whatever, like that's a thing you watch out for as someone whose purposes would be to educate.
Mm-hmm. The guidance, yeah.
Well, education itself can get broken. In what ways?
Not being about this. So if
Mhm.
the education is about not etiquette or not about the natural guilds or not
Right.
about the fundamental guilds, there's a failure
Or
there.
if attention wasn't gained.
Yeah.
Attention is critical to education.
Yeah.
Right.
So this is where I came in earlier and said that there needs to be some kind of curiosity to begin with from the other party. Like there is that. This is where you have a very real danger of the charlatan, right? Because there's that gap in what's to be educated to begin with, and so even the curiosity can be there. That could be siphoned off into back into the egoic loop.
Right, if you will.
I'm not sure what my point with that was actually. So
Just immunity, education, and again, step into this building, the gilding, in the ontological matrix, across from Neo's work. Like that, I think that it's a great way of thinking about it. So, like, I want to just try walking up these guilds here.
Okay.
Next, we've got environment.
So if you remember, immunity is focus. So immunity is hygiene, nutrition. Those are all the, if you divide it further into its own sub-guilds, areas of concern, you got your you got your hygiene, you got your nutrition, you got your rest, and you got your fitness as the core starter pack. So education
Right.
needs to point to that, being the next step past education. To finish off the guild sort of exam, you couple focus, which is those four things, with preservation and restoration. So medicine and martial arts and all of that kind of stuff would go into this. Preventative measures from being injured, what to do after you're injured.
Yeah, like, it feels weird. Like, for me, when things get into chart form, table format, when things get linked up into, like, cohesive narratives and displayed, that's when I can come back and periodically look at something and be like, oh yeah, that's the
Well,
structure.
we're missing the list in between that talks about focus. But if you picture those four keywords in place of immunity, that's all. Nothing's changed about what I'm discussing. You just have to look at immunity in its compartmentalized form, which
Okay,
consists of
right.
focus, the four bits of focus that line up with the natural concerns directly. Then you got two statements made about focus that take it out of the moment and place it in the context of the dream for restoration and preservation.
So
same
education points to a learning process of feedback, creating maps and feeding them back. Immunity points to
one of the first maps.
that like using a holonic model of understanding is what allows things that shouldn't be there to go away.
And it's in relation.
That's a weird.
And it's
way
in
to put it,
relation
maybe.
to this focus that mastery should be understood, right? You're the master. You're mastering your focus as I'm mastering my focus. That's where the etiquette bit
Right,
comes
and
from.
it's so kind of weird to like try to describe the bridge, like the jumping that we're doing here, going through natural guilds towards the
An economy.
archetypes.
Well, yeah, because those
Um,
remember we compared the archetypes to being more of the productive side versus the guilds being more of the constraining side. So you got the constraint.
Right, yeah.
You got the guild is like all your potential. The archetypes are like all the potential of what can be versus the guild is like restructuring it in a way that allows for the potential to keep climbing layers and layers and layers.
Right. So it's
a
kind of like
specific
a
constraint. It's a specific way to. That's why they're so different. One is active, the other is almost reactive, if you will.
right. And so these natural guilds, all in all, are coming together to create a sentient machine. Right.
create a set of-
Bottom to top. This is what we're modeling.
To create a set of constraints such that pure potential is directed towards emerging a sentient machine. So it's more like water in a plant.
By having
rather-
the correct model.
Yeah, it's closer to like water in a plant and letting it grow itself versus forcing it to construct its construction cell by cell.
So, like, a very big claim here would be to say that this natural guild stack came literally from nature. It's a description of what is. It's not arbitrary, made up. Right? That'd be a big claim, and that's kind of the purpose.
Like
It's
a
not.
symbolic
This isn't an
representation.
arbitrary how humans organize.
To give it fairness, it's a representation of one, right?
Right.
It doesn't live on the same layer as the same nature that it's describing. So it is a symbolic
Right, obviously.
expression.
But the big claim is that it's isomorphic, and
Yes.
it came from that.
Yes, the isomorphism would be the claim, yeah. And it's not like the kind of its natural claim that you see in, say, fascism, where you're coerced into a particular set of ideologies due to them being claimed to be natural, but rather,
Right.
it's okay. Well, we say that this is what nature has given us. What's your feedback? What do you observe as the feedback if you apply this? Is there isomorphism between the
Mhm.
model and the experience to
Right.
begin with?
Hmm. So this is a very generic self map, sort of, the natural guilds. When we go into the archetypes here, it becomes more uh, geared towards a social structure,
An earthly one.
an existent social structure in, again, like these kind of heavenly realms. Like, do they exist? They don't. Well, does a corporation really exist? Does it not? Like, we're familiar with this, right?
We tend to think that things
Things
only,
don't have to be right in front of us that we see
a
them
lot of
to be
people,
real.
a lot of people don't think things exist unless they're written down on paper. Which is weird.
Yeah. Okay, yeah. Right, I know all kinds of weird stuff out there.
With that,
Break time. Yeah, so this natural guild structure, it it's based in what exists, so to speak, in a way. Who we are,
Yeah.
it's mapping, reflecting. That's why education is at the bottom. The very fundamental thing that we do as a whole is to have this neurological network which isomorphizes
sync with, yeah.
the reality of the world outside. That's our
Yeah.
basic function is education. Thing we can learn about is immunity.
Which
Now
is
we're
about the
bringing the
self.
holonic model,
Yeah.
and this is what allows the dissipation of any kind of like
So, and if you notice, these
non-holonic
guilds,
kind of structure.
these guilds are also kind of set up in a concentric sort of way from the inside out. So immunity is dealing with your hygiene, with your nutrition, with your rest, with your fitness in your environment, right? But then that spills out into the outer environment, and then it's the same cycle again of the hygiene of that environment.
Mm-hmm.
Does the intake poison it?
Right.
Whatever
And
you
when
bring
you
into
say
it.
when you say like hygiene, fitness, all this, these are aspects of the holon.
Yes.
Like these are literally holonic aspects.
And first apply to the self because that's the easiest target, but then expand it into a wider and wider social
Mhm.
context with how you appropriate different elements of the environment through technology,
Right.
what you record out of and remember with data, all the way leading to economy, which is taking all of these things together into one smooth not machine as per se, but a kind of a protocol dance, if you will, that just brings it all together into one unified thing. So while each individual guild prior to that is sort of more specialized into what to do with the next with the output of the previous guild. So for example, through technology data accumulates. This thing is like, okay, take data, take technology, take environment, take immunity. What does the concert of these things look like together, moment by moment, moment by moment? What do we need structurally to do that? That's really what that guild is for.
The way you put that sounds a bit top down, but on to the another point, I guess
It's an emergent
it
element.
is all emergent
out of the
from-
out of all of the things that came before it. It just puts it all together into one hold-on thing.
Right.
It's to repeat that cycle again, so that
I
that
like
now
to-
it can do the same dance with the external industry.
I like to explain it at least as any layer in this stack could only come about when the previous had already been there. Like
Yeah.
that's kind of the way it's constructed. No layer could exist without what's below it.
Mm-hmm.
It couldn't have been put any sooner, in other words.
Yeah, even like it might seem questionable to say why this data above technology, but writing is a tech, right? Writing
Mhm.
is a technology. So in order to collect data, you have to be able to write, or before that you have to be able to speak,
Mhm.
which is itself a technology.
So, can we just, you've skipped really fast over environment. So from immunity, this holonic model basically,
It's because
after education, environment is what you're applying that to, I assume, but what is...
So it's instead of being focused on where the focus begins and ends at the skin, right? It's just extended into your living area, into your, say, community or immediate natural environment. Like, it's just taking the whole notion of immunity and expanding it beyond the body.
Hold on. Because immunity gives you the holonic model, it allows you to construct an environment out of holons. That's what it is.
Which is why you don't really need a huge exposition on what environment is. It's just whatever the immunity relationship was to yourself is expanded to the air you breathe, the water you drink, and so on and so forth. Basically expanding your body onto a greater
Okay,
context.
so, and then technology seems to be taking your environment beyond what's usually just presented as natural.
Yeah, a modified environment through your
Like
presence.
taking the environment and clumping this together with that, or splitting that into two.
Yeah, like making clay.
Mhm. Right, that's a processing of the
Yeah,
environment.
you can't get clay, for example, if
And
you
then
don't
you've-
step out into the environment and have the environment be capable of that kind of stuff.
And so data is information about the environment, it seems.
Yeah, the collection of accumulated changes.
Data is explicitly like a map.
Yes.
So we're kind of jumping up.
Because
Through
we need-
technology,
yeah.
we're mapping, we're quantifying often.
So you need a mapping technology is what
Uh,
this is referring to.
quantifying the environment, and then if we have that, then we can speak to each other about things that aren't immediately in our area. In other words, we can say this those people, they need that, I need this, well, maybe we can work something.
Right, and that dance is covered with economy.
Right. Okay, so now I think that's probably a path I think most people could follow. Ish.
I hope.
Up to economy.
That is the path to follow, so yeah.
Portal Mountaineers will get it.
The other thing I think was skipped over that I believe would deserves mentioning is coherence, because in the Excel sheets that you probably noticed, what happened is you have coherence being used as a marker for specific positions within within the construct. So I wanted to speak to that a little bit. One of these things has to do with coherence in general, and that is being able to cover the domains of progress. So the first cycle from participant to member is the insight that everybody is a member. The next insight is that of mastery is how participants can be brought to membership. The next insight is to do that across multiple ingresses. So that's just generic mastery. But then there's also this guild school, if you will, right? Some of these guilds are more relevant to specific corporate positions than others. So not only do you need generic coherence in certain respects, you need actual mastery, say, in the economics guild. So not mastery of gilding, as it were, but also of that specific domain inside of gilding, and to know all about agile economics and have that model as clearly defined in your mind as the generic model itself. The point I'm trying to make here is that clearly not everybody has to know everything, but once you get into something like a corporate structure that interfaces with the real corporate world, you need to know economy, you need to know industry, you need to know trade, you need to know like all of these things in a way that actually mirrors the world. So from that perspective, you need not only coherence in general, but also coherence, mastery coherence, and all of that kind of stuff in specific guilds. So there is a kind of a school to it as well. It's not just the generic education parlance. Right? So when it comes to the economy guild, there's going to be an actual guild that there's just people are becoming very adept at. Right. And likewise, what that will do is it will create demands on what kind of data is necessary, what kind of tech is necessary, what kind of, it's going to have that push down effect as well. This is why it's so important to distribute coherence across this corporate / institutional world in a way that allows membership to be the final say and mastery to be the fulfiller and the guidance of what is legitimate demand.
I think you did a whole big arc there. You probably just went into where I think we were going to start going with corporate structure.
It was just looking at the two layers institute, how the institute pushes down, but its members. Corporate is supplier, but its own masters. So there's that inversion of position, if you will. That membership is the actual demandor, not the other way around.
Well, it does kind of make sense. Everybody knows how to demand.
But the corporate world right now is the demander, and we are stuck sucking it up. This is like exactly the reverse of that.
That is correct. Okay, so we went up to economy, and like you were mentioning about industry, diplomacy, trade, all that. That's kind of seems like wider world. For the purposes of describing our gilding in the ontological matrix, we have decided to stop at economy so that we can start talking about how to fill in what is the demand, what's actually being demanded and supplied. We want to get to that point, right? so
Yeah.
that we can have an internal, at least, economy, like
Well,
a rudimentary.
what's good about that is that we're not starting from ground zero, and as far as what the demands are, and that becomes very evident if you try to think of, well, what does retaining this structure, here, like what does it take? That's the first and foremost ask of the Guild Institute, is to allow gilding, right?
Mhm.
Just a generic demand to allow for gilding. That's so it already comes with a set of demands. So we're not starting at ground zero, is what I'm trying to say.
Mhm.
And the rest of it has to do with that structure itself. So I'm opening up a can of worms, essentially, for the discussion.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So we've gone up to economy. And wait, so economy is what? So
So the economy.
we've got data, and economy just seems to imply like sustenance. That there is a demand, that things get demanded, need to be sustained.
Or expelled, garbage. We need to poop.
Right. Yeah.
That's
yeah,
also
yeah.
part of the trade.
Mm-hmm. So economy is there. Like when I think about like focus and the holonic structure.
Yeah,
Like
it is linked to that intimately. Yes.
Right, like that's where it comes from, like shelter and sustenance. Right, certain things need to be removed because we have archetypes to take care of here. Never mind the rest, and then also things need to be introduced to sustain.
So maybe the word metastable is what we're looking for, because we're talking about the impermanence of things need to be like built into the structure. So the flip side, the semi-permanence that you're talking about that needs to be built up could be called metastable. So like a membrane is a metastable
Right,
structure.
that's the same idea.
Right, and also
I
membrane
believe.
is a great way to talk about the bubbles. There are all the circles are membranes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And each one would have its own kind of economy, if you will, just based on immunity itself.
Well,
That it needs to be
so
sustained.
maybe we should qualify what we mean by economy. So it's not your typical economic theory that is normally discussed in this with
A
this
market.
word. What we're discussing is a very basic concept of existing as a living creature comes with a certain set of demands created by the body.
It's an inversion
So, like,
of what we're
eat.
used to,
So
which
like
is
to
the
eat or to
the
sleep.
interesting part, because the market, what does it do? The market is
Creates a supply and then searches out for demand.
right. When you think about the market for this, the market for that, it's always about the market for cars or the market for houses or whatever. It's never like it's like demand. Oh, demand what? That's obvious. Whatever people buy, that's what they're demanding. Never mind. Just forget about it.
Yeah, it's not
Right.
even a
Here's
question.
what's available. It's amazing. This is the next amazing thing. Right. That's all the market is about. But meanwhile, people in their inner experience feel lack.
Because what they do
and
demand isn't supplied, and what is supplied is not what they're demanding.
It's just completely disconnected.
Well, it's disconnected enough. It's disconnected to the point of it can't get any more disconnected, or else it'll crumble down, and because nobody
Right.
needs it.
So the motivation structure is basically like
Fluff.
yeah, we're gonna keep the corpse living because if it dies, we die. That's the only, like, as far as a corporation thinking about their customers, there's not more than a thought like that.
They're so kind.
If the customers die, we die. It's like the
If enough
imperative.
customers die, it doesn't matter if
Right.
if a couple die. That's not
Right.
a problem. Sorry to do this again.
Right. Oh, take your time. with that, we'll be right back. Ta-da!
So, if I may, I think we can boil down our idea of what we're calling economy to two very simple concepts that emerge out of the previous guild stacking. And that is basically the concept of the demand that is by virtue of existence, essentially. So the structure exists. To exist, it has to supply itself somehow with things to take internally and to express them externally, in the same way that an organism needs to eat and to excrete
Right.
material out of the outer world.
Yeah,
So
it
it's
seems obvious,
so,
doesn't
so,
it?
so the entire thing is like conceptually is to manage that element of it on a more explicit note.
A post came up on SOTS actually, which is completely irrelevant. I think it's even worth looking it up. But speaking of like, where does demand come from? And like this linking like economy with this idea of like a true demand, if you will. Maybe I should look up my profile. Where is me?
You have notification.
The fuck is that?
They updated, man.
Achievements.
Don't worry about it.
Just go to my page, you shit.
Profile.
Ah, yes. So I don't know if you saw this one about post about AI singularity, nano drones, and liquid
No, I
bodies. The point of this post was sort of a like, we're awesome, we should be fixing the world.
Okay. I
But
dig.
maybe I can just read it really quickly. It's only one big paragraph, but to me, I don't think we as techno sorcerers of the Kali Yuga that we should see technology as anything other than a potential source of liberation from humanism, capitalism, enslavement. All flows of desire can be set totally free by the internet and by tech, a vast network of rhizomatic members of the outside, each content with creating their own ever-expanding, interconnected, flowing networks, can be achieved. Man can be killed off, and desire, pure, unbridled, liberatory desire,
Okay, so this is a
can
lot
be
of ranting
realized.
without actually saying how.
Now, and this also points, man can be killed off. And he doesn't mean like the species, right? But like,
The agents.
and
The
yeah,
anthology.
yeah, can be unleashed. Anyways, yeah, no real like specifics and all that, but he was mentioning as well Oedipalizing, the Oedipal complex, that being like a child to the state kind of thing, restricting authoritarianism.
Are you sure that's what that means? Because the
Um,
Oedipus complex is not that.
Give your thing.
Oedipus has killed his father and married his mother.
Yeah. What?
That's the myth.
To want to do your mom? Is that no? But there's different ways of seeing it. I know that one. I can't remember
Yes.
how this links in exactly.
Yeah,
and the context is too short. But anyways, so I replied. To me, this post tears apart in two directions. One where it seems like we can just bolt more technology onto capital, which we view even ourselves as, and the other way of deep ecology and heaven on earth, right? So he's having these kind of like totally like two conflicting views, in my opinion,
Mm-hmm.
that technology is just going to fix it. What if we are blinded by capital, blinded from the deep economics of our own body, blinded to more fundamental desires, the libidinal economies of our being? How can internet and tech fix a problem that is right in front of us, yet we all ignore? How will more toys address a hijacked desire? How will it help us to see the tree of life from which true desire springs? Right? This is our economics in Portal
Yeah.
Mountain, right? That's it.
That's the answer for the question. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, all I wanted to say there is that is relevant, but it just goes to show you how without grounding the entire qualitative experience in some kind of comprehensible representation like we're doing with the model,
Right.
that
To interface with that.
that you can talk like all of these lofty ideas without really grounding them into anything realistic, which is what we're trying to really do here by really going after redefining the award economy to simply refer to the
What
the
economy?
thing-
Reward economy?
our economy.
Oh, I thought you said
the guild, the economy
reward
guild.
economy.
No, sorry, I misspoke, or mispronounced something.
Yeah.
Um,
Which does make sense though. It's the reward and punishment economy.
Right. It is. The point there being is more to capture the fact that a living organism exists in its environment, and in order to continue its existence, it's got to
Right,
it's got to maintain a
It's
metastability.
just like self-explanatory, yet it's not.
That metastability demands something from its environment, and it demands to be able to export things into the environment. And while it's doing that, it has to maintain the environment in such a way that its next demand is still can be satisfied, and the next export can still be handled, right? Like that. That is the intricate balance of whatever you put out must not fuck up what you get out of it. We're doing a great job with that, apparently.
Whatever you put out must not fuck up on
The environment.
on what created that output.
Right, you don't shit where you sleep. Basically, that's the general idea, and hygiene is like the first thing you tackle For that very
I
same
don't
reason.
know why is having a model like so difficult like that?
It hurts to learn.
It just is.
It hurts to learn. And if you regurgitate it wrong, you get punished.
Right.
So this focus.
And so we have a trauma built up.
Focus is punished all the time.
We have a trauma built
And
up.
we're basically saying, hey, the thing that you keep getting head smacked in the head by the system for, do that.
Right.
Do exactly that all the time.
Yeah, lean into the punishment in a very productive way. Presumably, you'll never know
Well,
until you find out.
This is where the danger of the dark night of the soul comes into play. You need something to fall back into once you let go of the system. Once you let go of that
Right.
punishing interaction.
Exactly.
If you don't
yeah.
have anywhere to come back to, it's just still punishment.
Yeah, but I mean, I think most people don't feel like they're ready in the headspace for, okay, like something has to change, but is it really going to
Well,
be
we're-
an organized movement?
We're fundamentally trained to not be ready. We're
Is it-
trained to not be ready at all times.
Is it really going to be just another church movement?
Well, left at the way we're
'Cause what are we
we're
talking
doing
about,
it,
the
left at the
gilding?
way we're doing it, if only the superficial stuff is exercised, then it's just going to be another recuperated.
Right. But it was
thought.
never about the fluff. In fact, we're so unattractive in our our presentation. It's
like,
purely about the structure
like
and all this.
you can't walk away by talking to us with the superficial stuff and feel good about
It's
yourself.
good that nobody's convinced.
Thank you.
It's too powerful.
Thank you. You're acting as the greatest filter we could possibly want. But it does speak to how fucking tall of an order it is, and it's fine. I'm not doing
The
it.
tall order
I'm not
of
doing it because it's
responsibility.
easy. I'm not doing it because it's easy. I'm doing it because it's the only thing to do.
Right. I mean, there's demands are everywhere. They're just, hey, why not? I'm part of this
Well,
tree of life.
I'm kind of putting my money where my mouth is, in that I'm saying this is demanded, and
Right.
I have the capacity for sorry, I keep doing this, so my apologies.
Well, we all have our own perspective too. It goes both ways.
I know I'm the language supplier, whatever. It's not a patent thing.
And also, you know that everything that becomes an expression is part of a teamwork.
Right,
And
because
wouldn't make it anywhere without someone else.
because without you interpreting what I said to begin with, it doesn't make any sense anyway.
You would just be another one of the raving lunatics.
The end is near. The end is near.
And so would I. I mean, depending on your temperament, that the type of raving lunatic you are.
Do you remember when Futurama, they found out the pyramid, the Martian pyramid underneath the New York? And they're like, okay, we have to tell this, we have to tell to everybody how this is a very uniquely dangerous situation. Comes out in the fucking robe, starts with with his bell
Yeah.
ringing, going, the end is near.
Uniquely dangerous.
Well, no, he's like, we gotta tell everybody, and we have to make it very scientific.
Right.
Like this is like he literally gives them those instructions.
But that's how it looked.
But then he comes off and he himself starts yelling like a crazy lunatic.
No one will believe anyways.
It's because it doesn't. It's actually not lit right now.
Well, have at it.
So it's actually.
You good?
I'm good. I'm good.
Okay.
You go. You go ahead. So. Shit! I lost my train of thought.
Bender coming out. The temperaments.
No, that was the
look
professor.
different.
It was the professor.
Oh, the professor did. Okay.
The end is near.
The temperaments all would have definitely their own way of looking crazy, and yeah, I'm thinking like, what's the motivation that people would want to? It's that they feel the problem, but then the charlatans line up. Like all we do is model things. We just show what's happening.
Right.
You know, there's a problem. You feel it. People are gonna come across and tell you, oh, hey, do you feel the problem? Well, my system. Check this out.
Yeah, it's
Blah 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 blah.
it's how they
Dude.
So the charlatan is really defined by the fact that they will reify everything that in a download fashion, but it never comes back up in the upload. And this is their consequently, this is where their failure point is
Especially
always found.
probably because it's entirely, like you would say, ontological in its limits. It's
Well,
not. It's not. It's the purpose of its ontology isn't to point to the phenomenology even of the inner experience and quality and all this.
Right, it'll get stuck in its own loop and fail to reify back.
But how would you know? Even like, right, you're talking hijacking dopamine, hijacking.
Well, this is
serotonin.
the difficulty. Well, this is the difficulty here, is because
That's what the charlatan is more sinister than potentially.
Because the actual model is that much more subtle. It's actually harder to breach past that kind of exploitation.
Right. Well, this is like a big claim. This is a big claim. Because anybody who sees themselves as not a charlatan or has had some certain experiences and encounters, I'm good too actually, encounters this model, should be recognizing it well. There's kind of a deeper recognition than, the surfacing, oh, that's another charlatan. You kind of,
And then
members can pick this out. That's part of what makes a member.
It's even more insidious because
member.
you have charlatans that have no idea why they're charlatans. They actually believe the shit they peddle, despite the fact that not reifying for themselves or anyone else. It's
Right.
kind of like the MLM failure of the lower tier people to recognize how much they're like just
Pardon.
being used.
And I guess it's going to be because of hijacking of neurology, right? Exploitation, weaponization of
That's what I meant by
psychosis and
training.
neurosis.
Yeah, that's what I meant by training. We're trained to actually avoid it by being trained to be psychotic and neurotic with regards to the given narrative, the external one, the artificial shit.
Mm-hmm. But the way it works is because there are layers of hijacking, you could say. It's taking
Yeah.
advantage of chemistry going on below that you do get rewarded.
And when you
the
say
charlatan
that-
himself is rewarded, everything feels
Yeah.
good.
And yes, that's that's the key. When you're saying layers, there's multiple layers for getting rewards and punishments every step of the way, every conceptual structure, association with groups. Every single one of those little tiny layers affect the specific dishing out of reward and punishment. So much so that it favors
Mm-hmm.
a general
Well,
stepping away from
And everything becomes a calculation
Right.
in the moment. Just boom.
right
okay,
everything moving away from the
go
moment
this way, be
onto being
rewarded
paper,
more.
onto being a record on paper, all back into the dream. That's
And you
why it's a
right.
psychosis. It's all towards the dream,
And
never
you're in
towards
this
here.
groove. This groove is kind of the neurotic part of being shifted by reward and punishment. The psychosis, then the fact that it is reality, it's taken as solid reality. That's the root kind of thing.
That there's no alternative
when
to
you
the story.
examine the moment, you realize that things being real is a constructed fact of causality, of neurology. Right? In a
Right,
sense.
it's something that appears to you
Right?
and goes
and
away.
this is to the hard problem, that disconnect, right? Like, as if there is a disconnect, it's just because it hasn't been processed, right? That's like the no zone. Don't go to the no zone.
Actively avoiding processing. It's your genital. It's your genital area. No touchy. It's inappropriate to speak to do these things in a proper company.
And where did the charlatan touch you?
Right. God. Oh my
In the
God.
no zone.
Oh my
Bullshit.
God. It's terrible.
Mhm.
I love it. I fucking love it. The no zone.
Right.
So yeah, the model-
the moment psychosis.
So the model is the no zone.
Right. The model is isomorphic.
And that's why nobody likes us.
The model is isomorphic with the no zone.
That's why nobody likes us, because we keep molesting it.
Just sitting in the corner, just furiously molesting.
The no zone.
Some call it mental masturbation.
Poetry is fun, even if it's really shitty poetry.
So all you have to know is it's being done furiously.
It's both rewarding and punishing at the same time.
Yep.
Cheers, man.
Good times. Yep. And so far, a pretty great session, I
Mhm.
think.
So we covered this intricate balance of existing creates its own supply concept.
Implied demand. I would call it implied demand.
A demand. Sorry, I'm still, despite the fact that I think I coined demand and supply as a
Right.
kick in the nuts
To reverse the supply and demand.
as a kick in the nuts to the
Economics.
actual economics theory.
Hmm.
But yeah, I still struggle to say it the correct way when it's like heat of the moment kind of thing. Because it's like it's a brand, right? Supply and demand is a
Now,
brand.
it's interesting when, as a being, something can be demanded on behalf of the ego in a way that it's like the top is actually supplying demands to be demanded up into the marketplace.
Like self-gratification
Right.
kind of stuff.
But it's not a true demand or a implied like implied demand out of these archetypes
yeah,
below.
so ego bolts
This
on.
is true desire. Like, I want to have a term. Like, do we have a term for this? We don't have a term desire even.
We do. It's in the affect diagram. It's part of the.
Desires on the.
Pretty sure.
I don't think so.
Or no, it's attachment.
Right.
Right.
So that which seems related, and so that's
Well,
we need to
in
differentiate.
Buddhism, it usually is used interchangeably too.
But what I'm saying is, like, there is a natural attachment then in a parlance of what we have now.
Yeah, like again, feeding.
And this
the,
is
like,
what-
like
this is what
feeding
we're
the
talking about,
Feeding the
right?
body is a natural such demand.
I can make a demand that doesn't have anything to do with anything.
Like I
It's
demand,
for
my body
itself.
demands sleep, so that means I need to disengage from whatever group activity
Well,
I'm in.
obviously, yeah, right.
For some periods of time, every single day, every single person does this. Like that's a demand that is not negotiable with the with nothing. Really, you can't escape this kind of stuff. So this is where the economy of our conversation is starting to take shape. It's about capturing things that pop up due to the existence of the thing, right? Then you have the activity to supply said
And by
demand.
existence, like, we gotta
So-
talk
so- so-
matter and environment.
There's a loop to it. So there's a big base to it, but then there's comes back and it feeds back into the loop again. So just let me
Right.
go through the steps to bring it back in.
I just want to connect that, yeah.
So the initial demand of existing, your body exists, you need food, people need food, whatever. That kind of stuff, right? Then what that causes is there's now a room for supplying that demand, which means activity to go out get the food, for example, right? So now there's two things in existence. There is the person who's hungry, and then there is the activity that happens as a result of supplying the demand. So now those two things have demands on
Wait.
as a
The
whole.
demand itself is an activity, so you should differentiate that the person creating the demand doesn't mean that the demand exists necessarily. You can stop demanding food and just
Right, when you're not hungry. I mean, you need to be
No,
hungry
I
for
mean,
that.
you can go on a fast or even a.
Yes,
a
those are edge
hunger
cases.
strike.
Those are what you'd call edge cases.
But
So
that's what I'm saying, though. The demand is.
Yeah.
Link that up with the supply as being a thing that's created. So is this demand, but the person existing is not why that.
I'm like really just trying to
it's
cut
connected,
to the very simple case, the most obvious case, and then edge cases can be extrapolated based on the differences that they put forward onto the table.
How does anybody know if you're hungry?
You do.
But then how do other people know?
It's expressed.
Do they hear your stomach?
Well,
have
you
to wait for
could
that
just
to
say
happen?
you could just say it.
Okay, that's what I'm saying. There's a step there. That's all. Continue. Sorry.
Sure, but it's to me this is no different than your body is telling you it's hungry. Like that's not. It's the same step.
Right, I
It's
know.
the same
You
step
don't
to
have
me.
to justify it further through fiat. The fact is, it
exists.
came up from the body.
That's really what I'm.
This distinction needs to be made in how we can define true desire or true.
But the activity
put the capital
to
T
supply,
word.
but the activity to supply is now arbitrary in a sense. That's not the part that comes from the body.
Right.
But
right,
what-
right.
but-
So you
but
could
what it
argue that
lays
the
down-
demand was arbitrary, but the fact is it did happen. It was which it would be a normal, natural thing we would claim.
But and then the supply is technically an arbitrary end result of that demand because it could happen any number of
So
ways.
here's the thing. No, wait.
But what that lays down,
Wait.
what that lays down is a change in the environment, and that change in the environment shifts what the demands are from that environment altogether, including the people making the demand in the first place. So the very demand in itself being supplied changes the fact of the structure of the context of what's being
At that
demanded.
moment, let's say we've all eaten lunch. Okay, well now we're doing other things.
Right. And so now you got your meta schedule clue as to why it's so whack in its
Shifty,
formulation.
ambiguous feeling. Yeah.
Because as soon as you do something, you're changing the thing that's being done to.
And it's like
It's like the observer
You
problem.
really need a very quick and agile medium, like properly
The
using
mind.
cards or paper. Mine, sure, but for groups, it helps to.
Well, we don't have anything better than the mind yet. That's what
We
I'm
have
saying.
pencil and paper.
Pencil and paper are slow. Our mind is the quick one. I'm not saying that this is like.
I mean,
I'm
over
not
the
saying
course
this
of
is
organizing a
inherent.
day, organizing a whole day, yeah, you can take a bit of time to write something on a piece of paper. If
Yeah,
you're
like-
organizing 10 people for a whole day of what to do.
I'm saying you're giving up like the mind is the quickest tool, but it's giving up its permanent marking. If
Well,
the
there's a
more
balance.
the more permanent you go, the slower it goes, the slower it gets. So you see this with computers too. Computers are faster than paper, but things are shifting computers
So
way
you just
more.
can't. Media is available, okay? You can't argue. It gets used.
Oh yeah, I'm not
That's
arguing
I'm not
against
arguing
it.
that.
I'm not arguing against
So
it.
what were we talking about though again?
Oh, I was just not arguing. I was just
Forget what the arc.
I was just making sure that we still count the mind as being the quickest medium that can
Obviously,
that can do
I'm
meta
thinking like
scheduling.
facilitation where you've got 100 people. Like that's chaos. You need
Yeah,
you
yeah.
need media.
And to slow down. That's the other thing. Like with that
Right.
many people, you actually have to slow down, so it's not a problem. That's what I'm saying there.
Obviously, yeah. Right, one-on-one you can catch up to a certain level very quickly. To make something you could say inclusive of the representative of what's going on.
Well, and our
It
first
needs to be more of a
and our
process.
first two modes of operation are conversation and broadcast. And if you note it,
Mhm.
notice that
That's
they're
the
basi-
broadcast is writing on a piece of paper.
Yeah, they're basically the same thing, except one is kind of like quick in the moment with very few individuals involved, whereas the other one is like slow, out there in space, slowly
Potentially.
accumulating more and more.
With
more
media,
and more
as soon as
response.
you broadcast, the fact is you can have 1 million copies in 1 second.
Well,
it's
I
scalable.
mean, that's true of air because of like the waves vibrate.
Nah, it's
They
scalable.
duplicate.
Let's say you
themselves.
want to write a message, 1 sentence. The world could know about it.
I know,
in an hour.
I know what you're saying, but I don't know if that's different than anything already
That's a property of a broadcast. That's not a conversation at that point.
Yeah, what's the difference between that and yelling really loud in the middle of a very busy street where everybody can hear you?
Because maybe 100 people heard you once, and that's it. 1 million people can't hear you doing that.
Right. It's again going back to memory, like how
And also,
permanent,
it's
how permanent
momentary.
How
It's
permanent
momentary.
something
That's
is.
the obvious difference.
Yeah. So how permanent something is versus
maybe
how
100.
fast it's processed.
Right.
So in that moment, it's going to be processed 100 times, right? But if it's like written down, it's going to be processed one at a time as people
Yeah.
come
Maybe
across
even
it.
very slowly online.
Exactly. Exactly. So I don't think this is a very very important difference to talk about because
No, between conversation and broadcast, yes.
well all it does is
It's
like
good to
show,
know.
it
This is the
shows us-
dashboard. Okay, now we're talking because we're getting into
'Cause-
the technology of how we interact.
Sure, but what I'm saying is that now what we're seeing here is that conversation and broadcast are really just a spectrum of time to permanence, efficiency, processing efficiency to permanence. Right? Like
Right.
something could be very
Speed.
slow but permanent, and we get that with like your bigger animals. We get that with our bodies. We get that with all of
But
those
it must
kinds
be a
of
spectrum because
lower
like
layers.
a lot of things like you can literally have 30 people on a Zoom meeting all in one conversation, right? And that's the same as if you're
Well-
in a circle,
Then you have to do a protocol. It's basically token ring at that point.
right?
Like you have to have. Okay, now you speak.
No, I know.
Now you speak. Now you speak.
Um,
So it's not this. It's again. It slows right,
right,
the fuck
but
down.
okay, so people
Number of people.
in
broadcast,
an area.
slow. Less people.
So
quick,
these are called
fast.
media protocols for how to deal with different media. If you're in a media like say a gymnasium with 30,
About the
30
spectrum
people,
of media.
spectrum it is.
Damn spectrums. They're everywhere.
With 30 people,
So
You
I've
would
been in
use
meetings.
different-
I've been in meetings with hundreds of people. Like,
yeah.
What happens is that only a few people speak.
Yeah,
Because
I
they
know.
are the only people designated
too.
for that, and then everybody else is sort of like is there to
They call
check
them,
off the mark.
They call
that
them
I was
town
here.
halls at Bank of Montreal.
Yeah.
But it's like famous people speaking from like some city.
Yeah, it's a
off
very
city.
it's very designated. It's very elite structured.
Right.
So that's the thing about broadcast. It narrows down the flexibility of the medium entirely.
Okay, so
But
we've
but
acknowledged.
the gain is the broadcast is actually far more spread. So it's more shit on the wall.
Now, here's another thing. You could see it in terms of like a hybrid, which is its original way that it is. In fact, in very fast, rapid conversation, broadcasts can be lifted and expanded outwards.
Well, I always had that position because the
Of course.
conversation itself.
Yeah, that's
is
why I
the
said
po-
that
is
that's the
post.
original. Broadcasts come out of the conversation.
The conversation
not
is itself.
separate.
The conversation is itself a broadcast.
There's no.
But the difference is how it's processed, slower, and and it's got a more permanent presence. This was what was said in that conversation, aka I'm not changing my mind mid sentence or something like that. It's already there.
Convo, broadcast. What were the next? What were the next two? Food for thought. Dashboard. Broadcast.
Well, then it becomes schema and action oriented. So you take what is broadcast.
No, what's the hold on here? Conversation, broadcast. There's two other terms.
Look up modes of operations.
Yeah, fine, I know.
Workshop.
Yeah, workshop, yeah. And literature. There we go. Food for thought. And be right back. Sure, you can. And so we were just talking about the dashboard, though, and so glad we figured out
So yeah, that's that's a bit of a tangent
what we've
about.
so far called workshop and literature.
Yeah, so that's a bit of a segue into how communication happens in guild and like how that's protocoled.
Right.
But to quickly touch back on the final picture of like the economic picture, we stressed that we reversed demand and supply to stressed that we reverse supply and demand to demand and supply, and this is now where we come up with two more guilds, the institute and the corporation guilds, that tackle both those sides of this coin. They're just there to represent isomorphically the
And
fact
so-
of demand and the fact of supply.
Right. Institute and corporation are very broad terms, and we would say even within a group, an organization, a guild organization, whatever, you would have this dynamic happening within the
You have this
structure.
dynamic happening with yourself. So you play a role of this institute, and you play
Right.
the role of this corporation in
And
response.
it's sort of like the marriage between mind and body,
Yes,
in a way.
yes, yes. That is a beautiful myth to equate it to. So the purpose here is to have the institute be the database and the supplier, the corporation itself, the supplier of all the demands of all the members that is encompassed by this contextual guild that is in question. One of those
So
bubbles.
what we call the Guild Institute is something that's always pervasive and always looking out for existing archetypal structure flows, these body patterns that are just bubbling up. Right?
Well-
The Institute's job is to make that heard, and remember I said, speak up.
Right.
That's
so-
another
so-
step entirely. The Guild is who speaks up.
So to make it less flowery and more boring and concrete, basically, if you have a group of people who are all guild, that means they're all members. That whole thing, so long as they're grouped, are the institute in question. So that means for different groups, the institute is whatever the group's demands are. And no more and no less. That doesn't span past that kind of influence.
So you're just kind of equating it to like the dots in this diagram.
Yes, and at the same time, I'm also saying it's a corporation.
Well, of course, that's what I meant. That's what I meant
who's
by.
supplying demands. So you already see the relationship. So the first thing, so the institute's job is to be the list of demands, right? But another face of it is the corporation that supplies other corporations the list of what the demands are, so that they can in turn supply for those demands.
Mm-hmm.
So the guild is itself a corporation
Okay,
and an
okay,
institute
okay.
at the
So
same time.
when you say that the institute has a corporation that's supplying demands,
Mhm.
that's that step that I was pointing to. It is another step to actually catalog that on the markets, quote unquote.
Right. So from the perspective of the guild itself, there's the institute that is the representation of the entire guild's set of demands. On the flip side, the concrete side, like that's in the abstract. On the concrete side,
So you
there's a group
think-
of people making
So the
a catalog.
institute itself is a
corporation.
competitive field,
Could be.
because maybe if
Somebody can
it's
capture
just
the demands better.
can't seem to capture demand, it's the
Com-
body
I don't know
keeps
if
feeling.
competitive isn't the right word.
Obviously, but I
because
wanted
those
to
can be
point
merged.
to.
Because it can always merge. They can
I
always.
wanted to point to the fact that
There's
can
no branding.
Be,
You need to take away the branding element out of it.
I mean, let's not be naive as well. A corp can be captured.
That's fair. That's fair. But let's recall another point
By
about
capital, obviously.
Recall another point. Corporations are emergent from if they can supply for a demand, there is a corporate that's recognized in
Right.
the mix. But if they're not supplying the
Right, yeah,
demand,
if it's-
they're not a corp.
Right.
there's the other element to it. So that this will work. This needs to work the same way for that institution, in that it no longer is that corporation because it's no longer fulfilling that function.
But there's quality.
Yeah.
These functions are commodified. Some
Does
people
that
don't
mean-
know, they're naive as to what's actually.
But that doesn't mean
Behind
that the
the scenes.
institute is gone. It just means that another
Right, but
supplier
that's what I meant is that
is better
in that-
at it.
It's kind of like we need heroes to be everywhere to advocate, and this is the institute everywhere. The institute has to be appearing everywhere. That's what I meant by
Okay.
it's in the dynamics of every corporation.
My issue with the idea of competition is that in competitions there's one winner and everybody else is a loser. This is not the scene I want to be.
Okay, then we have to like think through what happens when someone presumes themselves to be speaking for others. Oh, I'm the institute for this guild or whatever.
Well, this is where the whole coherence for conversation and all of that starts to affect that. It's called reputation.
Right?
So if you talk shit all the time, the your claims to know things might become a little bit more in need of more effort behind the fact after that.
It's a responsibility. I think it
Right.
always comes down to that. Like everyone has quality based on their knowledge and all that.
And coherence, being as basic as using the correct etiquette, should not be something that is very difficult to navigate. And the only people it'll be difficult to navigate is for people who are feigning it, right? Because if you are participating, like from your core, that etiquette will just be part of the participation. The coherence score is just going to reflect that aspect of it. So
I'm kind of imagining demand networks.
Gaming is just going to be fucking punishing.
Like it is really all our own responsibility to advertise demand, but I think demand can accumulate and aggregate in smart ways.
Demand needs
others, kind of.
reification, I think is what you're saying. Without say the demand isn't thought, but it doesn't get reified out into a more physical medium. It doesn't have a
The
further
reification
causal.
is a work. So it's kind of like a network structure to get from you demanding being hungry to the farmer.
Mm-hmm.
In that, right?
Yeah, like there's definitely a need for communication and all of that kind of stuff. So we're not talking about like read my mind, bitch. No, demand is like hunger is not something that is satisfied by sitting there and thinking how hungry you are, right? It's like hunger is itself a precursor to your whatever activity.
Mm-hmm.
The only thing I want to say about this, where the complication lies, is that said activity is also part of the environment. So it's not just the basic unit in its environment, it's also the fact that the environment is modified by that unit as it's moving moment to moment. So there's
Context ongoing.
So where the membrane lies between the two is a very nebulous
I know
boundary.
it seems it's always going to be that way.
It has to be that way because nature is that way.
And this
Nature
is,
doesn't have these hard line boundaries like we
I'll
think of.
I'll point to the holonic model again, which I keep trying to associate with pure potentiality, right? The fact of using holons and seeing the whole in the one, right? That's that loop.
Yeah.
By acknowledging that,
That's our diagram right
we
there in a
admit our
nutshell.
complete ignorance to everything, and you have to see the world through that
A lot more fuzzy, yeah.
different eyes.
It's
right?
very fuzzy through those eyes, which I guess is also a kind of...
And it always was fuzzy, but it's an illusion of kind of solidity, this ontological navigation,
we're
all this
taught-
moralism and all this shit.
We're taught from a very young age that fuzziness is punishment. Like that means
Uncertainty.
It means you haven't figured it out, or
Right.
you haven't put your thumb on it the way you're supposed to.
Which then just life turns into an
So
anxiety.
we are averse to fuzziness in in our thinking, and yet our entire argument here is that we need to create a very, very fuzzy, nebulous, bubbling up sort of structure that
A
keeps
model
shifting.
that's always on the go.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, validating those things that are really recurring and cyclical and keep coming back, and things that are there because of a reason, a true reason, you could say, like the organization of our body.
You know what this doesn't capture that would help imagery? This is a self-replicating structure.
This is like this diagram is like how many years old?
Yeah, it's old. So what this isn't showing is that this is like these bubbles. They're self-replicating organisms, much like the people that are that compose a group. Groups self-replicate.
Right.
So a group can actually separate into two groups. One of them dies, and the other one continues reproduction. If you
Right,
will.
right. So what
there's
you're
also
talking
these kinds
about
of things.
is the fact of human organization. Like, we don't think about this, but yes, this is a heavenly realm type of thing. That's just kind of a term I heard.
Abstract
latched
would
on
be
last couple
abstract
weeks,
would be
but-
another way to say it. So yeah,
in the not here and now, right? But it's the organization,
it's on paper, is what it is.
right? And the fact that it's shared over media, this is what's really allowing it to become something more than just an individual's thing, like something I do.
Well,
alone.
both, because what I'm trying to point at is the cells in your body, for example, create these intercellular networks to accomplish whatever the body needs to accomplish, and then cells come and go, cells replace
Right.
cells and all of that kind of stuff.
Right.
You have the same situation going on. And why I mentioned that is because you were asking a question before about what happens if you need a recurring organization to happen, right? If
You need
so-
this little block here.
So if you look at it,
This is your book that holds everything together through time.
and
all your protocols.
different variations of the same book, yeah. Like DNA, it's never the same.
It's
if
a
you will.
media expression. This is really what externalization of memory gave us, is
But
this ability.
think about what I'm saying with the
Oral tradition can do it to some extent.
I just want to finish the thought real quick.
Okay.
If you look at from the perspective of an organism replicating, right, biologically, you were asking the question, well, what about organizations that are recurring? And I was trying to say how nebulous that would be. This is the key to understanding what the nebulosity of it is. It's not that it's going to be the same organization recurring over and over again, but rather it's an evolving organism that constantly fills out its niches, right? So it's self-replicating, and then bits and pieces of it find niches.
The bits and
And
pieces
so the
are
niches are
interesting.
going to be the same, and that is going to look
because-
like a recurring organization.
Right. The organization itself may look the same, but I mean, the bits and pieces don't go away when the organization goes to sleep, per se. Those bits and pieces are always there to be refactored into the next thing. And we're talking hyper efficiency of an economy here.
So again, with my beloved convergent evolution, the body shapes that the different species land into keep recurring,
Right.
but
These
they're
are
not. But they're not
niches.
even the same species.
Niches of functionality.
You got crocodilians looking like dinosaurs, and
Right.
taking those.
But it's
body
like they all
shapes.
needed the same facility for some reason. So these are things that can just go to sleep, little bits and parts.
or
Resources.
the reptiles that look like fish and our dolphins that look like fish.
Maybe like you would call it a guild resource, capital R, right? A thing that goes to sleep, part of, but like how we need a
But there's no point.
a taxonomy.
But there's no
of-
point in a permanent symbolic reification.
But you got to call things what they are because it's in memory. It's asleep. It's not active. So
what I'm
is
saying
that?
is
you can label it.
there is no real need to call every species that looks like a crocodile. That's what I'm saying. If we do that, we're forgetting that
You're
there's
also
another stacking going on.
You're
from
introducing
other from other
potential
perspective.
problems, I see that the potential problem again.
Yeah. So
The top down, but again, yeah, this you
so
gotta
so
watch for
so
that.
you can acknowledge the isomorphisms between the different reifications. That's fine. As long as you also know through the model
Right.
how it all appeared
Yeah.
differently.
So that acknowledgement, that's your tag.
Yes.
Of like a meta category of
Yes,
of
yes.
things.
So there
I
is an
get it.
isomorphism to be had.
You
in
have to
there.
balance
and that's what
that,
makes the layer
walk
a
that
layer.
line.
That's what makes that layer the layer is that isomorphism in between, the resonance between the two body shapes being the same, gives us protocols of same movement and same niche, and
Because
and it's fulfilled.
you're kind of assuming increase in complexity when you go up in layers. So when you see it in totally different regions,
Yeah.
you can kind of see that as an advancement.
It becomes
in
its own
different
language.
Forms.
It becomes its own language.
So they're both speaking the same language with completely different structures underneath.
Right. So it makes no sense to say that the
Right.
language is actually dependent on this
So
structure, but
they
not
can-
that structure.
They can both interact with the same, like, environmental structure.
So yeah, the bird wing, the bat wing, the pterodactyl wing are the best examples we have of like very different ways of achieving very similar effects. Right, but like
True.
but when you look at those wings, like the pterodactyl one, it's got like that bone, everything is like that way. No, they had arms here, so.
Well, it's also how many times did the crab...
So they had like an extension out of here, and then they had an arm, and that's how they fly. And then you have your birds, which do this thing, and then you have your bats, which basically do this. It's really fucking crazy, the differences.
Yeah, true. Same effect.
And the crab, yeah, fuck
And
the
you got
crab.
your flying squirrel.
Yeah, which has got the flap of skin
It's
between
not really the same, but it's the same...
That's closer to the
now
pterodactyl.
you're hitting something...
That's actually closer to the pterodactyl. They're doing similar modification because their wingspan, right. They had that weird extension past their forearm itself, and then the entire flap of skin was connected to their feet.
The squirrel?
No, the
Or
pterodactyls. And there's so many different species of them. What
Hmm.
they all also share with birds is that their bones were hollow.
Obviously.
Not very. Birds are an interesting species all to
Which
themselves.
one doesn't have hollow?
I don't think bats do, but I'm not sure.
Hmm.
So
That'd be-
another thing about birds is that the way they breathe, their lungs are constantly fed oxygen, both on breathing in and breathing out. So they never have like an interruption in airflow, like we do. When we stop breathing in, there's dead air, then we breathe out. There's even air in our esophagus that we don't use.
Oh, so it's like a multi-chamber lung.
Yeah. So no, the lungs are between two chambers that do the actual sucking in and out, and as they're doing the breathing in and out.
Okay,
it's
so
just feeding the
yeah,
oxygen
multi-chamber that way.
continuously.
So there's a connection between the two lungs. Simply that's where it flows. Exhaust coming this way, and then out.
So when they're breathing in, the lungs actually expand and extract air out of the lungs into a chamber, while another chamber is filling up with oxygenated air, and it's on the breathing out where this chamber, the below, pushes oxygenated air in. So it sucks air out, and it pushes air in, sucks air out, pushes air in, and it's done in the reverse order than our lungs, because the sacs are the things that fill up when they breathe in, but the lungs are the thing that get oxygen when they breathe out. That's so fucked, eh?
Well, that was a nice David Attenborough scene.
I watch a lot
Watches
of
the-
I watch a
that
lot of random
fills its
shit.
lungs.
I watch a lot of random shit. Guns are my favorite. History of guns, that kind of stuff. Just chemical reactions in general. Mechanics.
Hmm. Very cool. Technology.
Anyway,
Technology.
segue. Yeah. Not only do we embrace the fuzzy, we're also saying to capture fuzzy, we have a couple of ideas. To do that, we're redefining economy by being by reversing demand and supply. We're also doing the magic trick of the demand portion of the guild is its most basic membership construct. So that's like the only real reason to have a structure there is to ensure that there is some kind of mastery behind of understanding what demands are. So it's not enough to just have a demand, it also has to have coherence. So there is some kind of filtering of coherence, skill based. Since the entire institute is involved in the entire thing, it's kind of supposed to be self-regulating in that regard, because there's no elite level layers that stipulate what is correct, what isn't. It's the model itself. So mastery is tested right then and there by expressing proper coherence or improper coherence.
And you were mentioning
context.
You were mentioning before mastery being associated with supply, I thought, and membership demand.
Yeah, so when it comes down to the corporation doing
I'm
the
not sure if
supply,
I just, because I thought you were saying the opposite just now.
So there's a greater demand on skill when you're doing the supply. So that's when, so the institute is, members are the highest tier, with masters and grandmasters' job to ensure coherence coming down to the pipeline. So some kind of checks and bounds from the coherence
If
department.
you think about it in
it's
terms
not
of
presenting the demands themselves.
the demand is the most, well, we're saying the origin point, the first thing to be done. So in a logical system, you would have that type of demand originating at, say, membership level, and a higher level where the demand would come to be audited, basically, and processed. Like that's where you would think somebody of a higher coherence would be required to do that.
That's what I'm saying. Yes. So there is a stipulation with that regard. The point being is that if you have demands without any thing, how do you tier them up
and
in succession
to
in
our
a way
point
that
of-
makes sense and doesn't step over the other constraints?
To our point of like true demand as well today.
Yeah.
Speaking of that,
To
to lazily just put true in front of a word.
Well, in
But
this
what
in
what
this
it's
case,
meaning-
in this case, the master cannot be lazy, right? Like what you were saying is that at
Right,
this,
you don't just
that's
supply
not-
all demand.
because if you do it lazily, you're not a master. Like,
Right.
Step off.
Demand is like a fire hose.
Right. So there is a tempering of demand by coherence, but the higher levels of coherence are not responsible for the demand presentation, only for filtration of
Right.
demands. So you can take the role of a member, have a demand, and then, as a master, assess its coherence. You're not the only one, though. So again,
Yeah.
it's not a.
well,
it's-
that would be the ideal thing.
it's just that
You
you're not
would-
ignored. Being a master
You
doesn't
would know
preclude
that
you.
would know that your demands
Yeah.
are likely to pass through a filter of processing as you advertise it.
And the other thing is that just because you're a master in a certain capacity, right, it does not preclude you from membership. You're still a member. You're still part of the entire ordeal on that level.
Yeah, not to mention supply is varied. This is a
You're
special.
still
We're talking
human.
specialization of
Well, we're
the
still
species,
human, right?
Or whatever. What do you call it?
So, yeah, no, you're right.
Specialization. The idea.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. So on the flip side, you have the corporation, which is now responsible for doing the supplying, but skillfully. And this is where it makes much more sense to have more masters in charge of how this goes down, right? The corporation is where you have, okay, we need to really constrain how it's all done so that every guild's constraints are maintained.
And so to bring this back to our original context, we're talking about like a gilding,
Mhm.
right? Could be a basement company run out of, convert the basement side door.
Yeah, just to make it concrete and relatable.
Could be a strip mall unit. Could be a tower across from Neo's work.
Yeah,
Right?
it's just to give it a variation.
Right. A place and space.
Hmm. So yeah, all I wanted to say is that in the corporate side of things, you have offices that are very close in their semblance to your typical corporate world setups, but ones that explicitly reflect the pure potentiality that the guild is sort of all about. So in that sense, it has a what you would say a corporate's demand
Pardon?
in this situation is for a lot more coherence in order to be able to do its functionality properly. Because without that level of coherence, that's the natural stack, guild stack, is not actually being maintained, and the whole thing's for naught. So that's very important there. So what ends up happening is that there's the corporate offices are divided up based on their reflection of a particular archetype, and in order to occupy,
We'll call it true demand for now.
and yeah,
We really mean demand itself. Anything ego based is not truly demand. And
yeah,
this is
we're not
the
talking about
filter.
shiny trinkets.
This is the filter which a master would be looking at.
Right.
Like, is this true demand or not? And that's
but
basically
also timing.
this is what
There's
allows
also timing-wise.
the guild to function properly.
So some demands can take longer, but are not as urgent. Some demands are much more
Right.
urgent, and they're low-hanging
Right.
fruits.
And in our contemporary society, we
Some
just
demands
don't
are exclusive.
demands just don't get made or tracked.
Some demands are
Period.
exclusive.
It's all a big depression of no money.
So the last real point behind all of this is that because the corporate offices are strictly reflections of the pre-potential of the archetypes, the people holding said offices have to have a better, greater demand on their coherence. So they actually have to understand coherence in
that
and of
is a
itself.
high demand.
And the second one is they have to be qualified in specific natural guilds to create facilitation of their operations. So the
Right.
computing guild, for example, is very necessary to hold certain corporate offices
Right,
in our
yeah, yeah.
structure. So there's no escaping.
And did we
having
create
to go
did we
up the
create that
guilds.
matrix yet?
Yes, it's in the
Okay.
it's in the corporate.
Right, because I know we
spreadsheet.
have lots of
The corporate
matrices.
spreadsheet. The corporate spreadsheet is all
Right.
about that. It's slotting specific temperaments. No. Yes, it's slotting specific temperaments with specific coherences, with specific guilds, natural guilds, being what the coherence level has to be for. So it's not enough to merely realize coherence in general, but it's also necessary to realize the same level of coherence in the very
I
guild
gotcha.
that you're
And
in.
it makes a lot of sense. Like many offices would require the manipulation of data,
Exactly.
like to be
To understand
competent
economy,
in certain ways,
to
yeah.
understand, you're literally a CEO of a company. You need to know both the real world out there
Right.
and the real world in there.
And
at the same
so
time.
I have a feeling like we need to take this whole big structure and collapse it down into a few different like simplifications.
We tried to do that a few times by
Because-
having specific products, and we still haven't gotten there yet.
No. I mean of organization of like, okay, I want to start a guild, but do I really need like every single office to be taken care of at the beginning? Like,
Not so much that, but how can I merge the raw structure into a functional one? Because you don't need
right.
You don't
You're transitioning from
Yeah.
existing.
You don't
to,
need explicit delineation of offices.
Yeah.
But what you do need is
So the
representation.
question is, you're presuming there is an organizational structure existing, something is there, and now we're going to move it towards guild type structure.
Using existent corporate ideology. To
So
do
the
corporation
question of
that
all
looks
these
like guild.
offices doesn't matter. The first thing you do is what is your function? What does that look like in the guild?
Right, which is answered by what am I supplying, which is answered by what is being demanded. On the other end of the spectrum, because if you're going to supply for a demand, you need a workforce. So you have a demand to make that supply happen. So it's not even, you're not even trapped into like a possibility.
And by have workforce, like this is more becoming
Skill.
ephemeral, even.
Yeah.
Like labor
for
on
the,
demand
for that project. yeah.
networks, right? Like it's all moving towards that kind of stuff, right? This Uber stuff and
It's always been moving towards
decentralized
it.
platforms.
It's always been moving towards that because it's always been that, and the systemic function had always been to try and centralize that activity, and it kind of revolting against it and spreading out again, and then trying to consolidate that activity again. The latest incarnation is what's happening with Uber, Skip the Dishes, and all of that.
Do you remember our dashboard discussions where we thought of different dashboards for like a delivery taxi driver type dashboard or this type of dashboard?
Which
and
I
it's like
personally
almost
think they're
every
all
role
conversations.
has a different dashboard to it, but the dashboard is like a template for what your screen looks like, kind of how you interact as different roles in this system, right?
What conversation you're having with whatever.
Like
Skip the
this
Dishes.
could be a driver here, and this could be a passenger, right? But they're interacting through the same protocols.
For example, Skip the Dishes. It's just a conversation between you and a virtual waiter. You have a menu,
Right.
and you're talking
Yeah.
to the waiter, telling them what your selections
No,
are.
I get it, and everything just kind of pops up ephemerally. So this is the same kind of bubbling up and foaming that the guild is filling in blanks for to allow to happen properly with holonic modeling. Right?
It tries to be explicit about
Like,
what is being
just
done.
I mean, thankful for Uber and all that and all these things, whatever. It's great now, but really they're just moving in on a free resource. Like it is,
So-
the people are just driving around. Why don't they get paid?
Here's what the guild
almost
is doing.
everything.
I think you miss my subtle point here. Here's what the guild, the model speak is doing right now. You were talking about like we're talking about the Skip the Dishes app and blah blah.
We're
blah.
empowering
And what I
people
said is
to
this.
work together
And
to
what I
do
said
it.
is this:
I
all
think
you're having is a
that's-
conversation with a waiter. I reduced all of the fluff, the specific fluff of what Skip the Dishes is doing,
Right.
to just the basic functionality. You're on a dashboard. You're having a conversation with a waiter, and you're just through. What I'm saying,
Right, yeah,
what I'm
yeah,
saying
yeah,
is
yeah.
that it brings
Yeah,
it
exactly,
takes
yeah.
the fluff out and brings it to
Because
the
that's your
universal.
role. Your role as customer. Okay, my role, customer, coming into this dashboard.
It's making it universal. So this interaction is this interaction. That interaction is also this interaction, and also this. Look, ordering an Uber. You're talking to a fucking driver. You know what I mean?
right.
Ordering
And
something
I'm,
online.
I'm
you're
assuming
talking-
for the coherence of the group, even a driver, they're logging into the same dashboard as a driver role.
And they're
the
talking-
customer has a
and they're
different, but
talking
it's
to
kind of
their-
like you can see this whole operation as a single dashboard,
Yeah.
right?
You
Just-
get,
just
you,
to-
you get
to
to
clear
pick
up.
a driver to talk to. They get to pick a customer out of
It's
the
like
peop-
an-
out
like
of
an
all the
app.
customers that want to talk to them. They get to pick their next one.
Right, driving.
That's all it is.
Okay, yeah.
And so, for all of its bells and whistles, it's just another version of the dashboard. So why
So-
not do the universal thing and go from there?
You would have a plugin on your delivery Uber, your restaurant app that says insert generic driver. That they get that dashboard. Driver
yeah,
as
okay,
a
I see
dashboard.
what you're saying, yeah.
As an app, as a restaurant, whatever.
Profile.
You're constructing this
You're
dashboard.
creating profiles. That's all it
Yeah.
is. Driver profile, customer profile.
Mhm.
How do those profiles
So
how do they interact?
So it should be
this
aligned
context?
by role, basically environment, and we're talking. This sounds natural. This feels like natural guilds and conventional guilds, like I'm the drivers guild, I'm the teachers guild, I'm the cooks guild.
Do you remember the way I set up the dashboard? You switch context, the conversations become more constrained to whatever it is you're doing in that guild. It's the same thing carried over. Now it's just Uber guild with the conversation can only be limited to locations and the times.
This whole like conventional guilds thing kind of makes me think of like that
They're just
that we can
they're just colors.
this is
feathers.
sense making at its finest, potentially, if it could be the greatest thing, right? Like guilds getting together, how to do this. Like if there's a kind of a main channel, you know what I'm saying?
Well,
Like,
you see failed.
but it's not
example-
like that, I know.
You see failed examples of it all over the place, like things like Uber Eats. It's trying to do skip the dishes, using the Uber setup for driving people around. So so it's two guilds trying to merge themselves. But what the problem is that skip the dishes and its ilk, if you will, are in their own bubble.
Mhm.
These guys are in their
course,
own
yeah,
bubble,
yeah.
and every time they
that's
interact,
the
it
thing.
has nothing to do with each other.
They only always want their own massive proprietary monolithic setup dashboard. And I was thinking that way
We need
just
to-
even a second ago, and
But
then
we
I'm
need to
like,
merge shit.
wait, all you care as a restaurant is a plugin that says this is a driver dashboard.
See these three bubbles? How they're like, this one is connected to, these two are connected here, this one connected there. Imagine like the membrane all of a sudden expanding and do, and then it's just one big bubble encompassing
Right.
everything that's there, and now it's one guild.
Also,
And then maybe it does it in reverse and does it again, and does it a few times and in different ways,
also imagine you order something on Uber
and skip the dishes
and,
counts.
or whatever, and this is your restaurant process. That's your driver over here, and then your interaction. Right, in a snapshot, sort of something.
Right, I see
something
what you're saying.
emerged, like you got
Yeah.
your food.
Yeah, and
This
all of a
is-
sudden,
this
and all of a
box-
sudden, and all of a sudden, you get like a dashed line formulating like that to encompass a new guild for that interaction.
Right, completed, cycle complete. Oh man,
I was saying that the idea since forever.
very nice. you
Is
always,
it not clear?
you always say that.
That's because it's always the way I thought of it.
Right.
What do you? Okay. Think about.
No, it's all, I know, I understand it.
Just
It's
think
always,
for a moment,
it's all
think-
like that.
Think about for a moment me sitting down and trying to draw out this diagram and like what would I picture
See,
if not that?
Zhenya, this is why you can't take too much credit all the time, because
You drew this.
there needs to be a
I'm not.
a narrative from point A to point B.
I'm taking credit for this. I throw the language out into the ether and it's used. It's fine. Like we're all using
Yeah.
it on the same level.
No, I get it,
We're using it on the same level.
and I'm
It's
not
it's
criticizing
it's
at
not
all,
an
and I
ownership.
100% appreciate.
It's not an ownership of
But
like
you have to admit you will tend to ramble in any direction, literally. Like
Yeah.
you will explain or try to explain any
how
part
else can I connect
in
trees
any
to
way.
pubic hair?
But the only way that becomes a thing is if it's molded into a story,
Right.
a
It's
coherent
somebody like you
story
to talk to
for a reason,
and
so
actually get myself to slow
to
down.
to purpose the language.
Yeah.
Heck
That's-
yeah, buddy.
That statement has more to do with I am really excited for the fact that none of it had to change based on new developments.
I know.
So
It's,
my statement is-
Continuing like synchronicities. Those are true synchronicities.
my excitement has to do with holy fuck, I got it right way back then and nothing's fucking changed. Like
In
zero
your mind,
things.
yep. Right.
I'm fucking proud of that. like it's rewarding in and of itself.
100%, buddy.
So it's not an ownership.
You said this yourself. Like this diagram.
Growing up,
This diagram
It's
is
old.
like what 5,
I
6,
don't know.
7 years now,
very old.
and none of what it's saying, like except for maybe like that whole replication thing that I mentioned. Like nothing that's there has changed in any way. So that's
Well, there's many ways to
That's-
interpret potentially.
that's the
too.
source of my response to being proud of the model. Right? It's
Right.
kind of
And
like
it still works.
it's not an ownership thing. It's just a matter of, wow, it was said so correctly back then. I can't believe it. Nothing
even
had
as
to change.
even as a narrative through time, a big circular arc and connection.
Even that, like it shows. We discovered something in it today that
Yep.
that we didn't even think of twice. One with the replication, one with the connection and the linear. Because we were trying to answer the question of like what would look like if you need a recurring guild over and over and over again, like say every summer, or say a ski guild every winter, or like shit like that, seasonal stuff.
Yeah. I feel like it's still ambiguous, the question of ownership of
Okay.
all objects in the environment are owned. Correct? Basically.
All right,
Even
so
including an ownership of self, let's say. But
I'm not sure I follow that assumption.
I'm just trying to
Own-
like build the bridge between existing capital, plateau, platform, what we're
So
in.
to deal with that question, we have to actually jump 2 guilds up.
Guilds up.
So economy only answers the questions of demand and supply.
So like we
It's constrained to that question.
yeah, I'm thinking of like this corporate structure and like the Excel stuff that we have.
I'm alluding to trade. Trade is the thing that
Okay.
bridges ownership to guild function. And there's a tall order there.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah,
Because
I'm imagining.
Because what you have to have is members with enough material to make it not the biggest issue or the primary concern of the function of the guild.
Right.
For it to be
that's a
an
tall order.
actual standing guild. Before that happens, it's basically
Well-
everybody is their own trade guild.
Now, what we want to imagine is this is the more perfect and original form of the gilding, straight across from Neo's work in the ontological matrix.
The one that existed with the real world.
There's
outside.
capital behind that shit. That's a
Yeah.
fucking tower right there too.
So to complete that picture, not only is the economics guild is in play in the internal functioning of it, there is an entire trades guild that shields that activity from the economic activity of the world. And it's
So you're talking about moving up the natural guild.
yeah, it's
stack
it's
in description.
it's a way to ensure that whatever is reflected inside the guild by the outside world is legitimate, is legal, is protected from
Right.
incursion.
Yeah, trade across any membrane. I remember talking about this.
It's a reformulation of immunity, but on a much higher level.
right.
Once you have economy and industry
Yeah, that
involved.
evokes immunity big time, because it's to the outside world.
Its entire function is to basically be hygiene, nutrition, rest and focus on the rest of the guilds in the abstract sense. Rest being like you don't involve with things that you don't need involvement in, for example. Hygiene,
Yeah,
being
yeah.
clearing out the garbage.
And I think you're taking that vision of the Holonic Guild, and applying it to those who you are interacting with on the corporate kind of level,
Mhm.
on the bigger playing field.
Yep.
And if you can detect that shit is funny, like that's what an audit's about, and you never fucking know.
And it's based on
You
the
gotta
previous
do-
guilds.
It's called due diligence.
And that's the thing. That's the thing about having to build up from all that bottom. It's like that immunity education, if you will. None of that matters because it's not going to happen. And that's why the corporate ask is that high, with regards to coherence, with regards to specific guilds that it needs to be
Mhm.
involved.
And the competition of
Trade comes
composition
up-
of all the members coming together.
Trade is a must for the entire corporate composition itself. Like, you can't have a corp without somebody in the trades guild already functioning, mastery-wise. Same with computing. The reason is that you need to know your fucking algorithms. I'm not talking about computing on a computer. I'm talking about calculating. Just in general, applying quantification domain, quantifying a domain of interest.
Could this involve, like, let's say you're cutting out one-piece doors on a CNC machine, and you want to create a parametric image of this door style. So
Parametric image.
no matter what the size of the door, the sides are always going to be the same length. So by parameter, you say, okay, door is this wide, door is this tall, and you're going to have a pattern cut out by coordinate, because the machine's going to come down to X, Y, Z coordinates. But if the door is wider, sorry, but this seems like computation to me a little bit.
Yeah, it is.
Like, if you've got
Like, all of these
where's
questions
a
are...
white piece, so this is like a door that would be a slab with nothing. This would be like with rails and stiles. That's a rail and stile. And a parameter is like, this door can be, let's call it W. That's the width. So when you're calculating the code, you're going to start here to do your cuts, X and Y axis, right? So that's your X this way, your Y
Right.
up and down.
Yes,
And,
so this
and
will
you're
be...
like, okay, I need to cut a door, but it's 23.5 wide.
Computation will be all the language that enables you to parse this into actual process.
To me, it's creating like a domain of what things that exist. So example, style width is a thing.
Yeah.
Right?
This is a domain
Yeah.
language right there.
Yeah, exactly.
And computation is nothing more than domain language exposition. It's taking your computational language and creating the program for the computer to follow. Give it to give all of that language
But
a structure, a meaning,
really,
a grammar.
this is also how we.
So you label your entities, you label your values, right?
This
Your
is how a
doors-
guild works, in that how we interact with each other, because we need to know what are the standards. In other words, that's what I was saying. The ontology, this circle here, represents an ontological distribution of meaning. This object exists. That object exists.
Right. So
and this is how we interact with that.
and that implies computation, by the way. It doesn't have to be an explicit
Right, like
guild at that point.
rail width exists.
The reason the guild exists is to also not only to let the implication sit there, but also model it after the fact, but on a higher
The
level.
core.
But on a higher level, because not everything needs that depth of understanding to begin with. You don't need a computation to do immunity.
But it
Even
all
though
has
you
to be
evoke,
there.
even though you evoke computation, but it's now downloaded to you from a master instead of you uploading it to your own being.
Mhm. It's like cascades of resolution on the meaning through iterations of increasing,
it's a difference
increasing complexity
So-
of resolution.
Actually, the difference is that it when computation is not being made explicit like that, it's at a level of awareness, but when it's made explicit, it's on the level of insight. So what we're seeing is a jump from the bottom of the domains of progress to the very top. So awareness, discipline, routine, and then insight. So the insight version of what you're doing, even in immunity, is already a kind of a part of the competition. That captures the representational element of it. So if you can explain it, You're kind of already participating in
Part
that
of that
guild.
is a self-knowledge of the structure itself being, like, the ontology. In other words, to not be attached in, to be a part, to have the psychosis of the reality of the ontology, but to know that that ontology is something that's being done.
So the further step is the mastery of that guild, which would basically be discovering the domain language of computation itself. Right? Like, or
Right.
or
That would be the
creating
core.
or creating
Again,
a domain
back
language,
to the core.
or in other words, creating a domain language for all the layers below it. For the natural guilds.
Right. Because the thing isn't just what it is; it's how it came to be as well.
So once you get to a point of where you have a domain language for the natural guilds, you have mastery of the computational guild.
Wait, say that again.
So
Okay.
once you have a domain language for the natural guilds and the fundamental guilds that they're part of,
Right.
aka model
Domain
speak,
language, yeah, right.
aka model speak, as it were, in its proper format,
And
which even I don't really speak.
A not often encountered part of the model.
But yeah, model, like it's
The structure of the guild itself.
computation sounds like very mechanical, but it's really perfecting model speaking. Like, see, turning everything that you said into that universal language, in the same way that the Uber app is just a conversation, and the same way where Skip the Dishes is just
Yeah.
you would funnel in that through that universal.
The sentient machine implies something much more than just the content itself, but an outward resonance, or resonating, right?
The sentient machine is a couple of steps of doing this domain language thing farther. So you get to computation by having it model everything below it. Once you start to do modeling its own language that models all of that below stuff, you get into synthetic neurological computation kind of stuff.
Right.
So you're
Okay,
you're embedding.
And honestly, that's probably what I was thinking about just now.
You're embedding
but
a way.
carry
for,
on to sentient machine.
So you're embedding a way for the machine to start speaking in a language that starts speaking about how it's doing its own thing. Hence to do that, you pretty much need the entire. You need the machine learning element to it to build that kind of stuff.
The domain needs to be expressible, like in its components.
So if you combine computation with AI as we know it, you get what I'm referring to as the synthetic computation network.
Right.
Now, if you embed the entire domain language of the guild into that as a self-referential element, so now it's got domain languages invented to capture the things it's learning of its own layers below itself. You completed the self-referential loop, and now you've got a self-sentience element going. So it's not so the entire thing isn't operating based on just the environment out there, but the makeup of its own self. Not only in
right. So this to me is expanding the idea of domain representation out into the body itself.
So it's like not only having a representation of functions, but also having a representation of the functions that you can do as a concept. So you can manipulate the concept, the function changes, and your makeup changes as a result. Hence the sentience part. Self-modifying, not only self-modifying, but self-modifying based upon itself. So always self-reflected. Much like the model is always model reflecting and becomes nebulous when you try to expand it to concrete things.
Right.
Or fuzzy, not nebulous.
So I don't know that we need to go
I don't think
too
so.
far that way into that.
No, this is more like a whole.
That end. Although
That's
it's
a
nice that
holy
we've
grail.
kind of like completed the
So-
whole natural guilds
So you know how
spectrum.
your book has like a what are we doing with that? Like what's the next step?
Right.
So this is like the next step after having achieved that step. So if we were to like think to accelerate the entire ordeal, past the point of what we practically need, and just like to expand on the idea further, what it looks like if you progress through those thresholds, we're landing at a utopian sort of situation. Again, tall order, but it's not the kind of utopia that you generally see in sci-fi with regards
Now,
to pleasure.
where are you delineating so far organization? Where have you seen in the book? Like, I assume you're like thinking along the natural guild stack.
So
As in the book is ending somewhere between computation or synthetic
no,
neurological.
I think the book is ending at economy, with computation being left for the very hardcore. I want to plow through this shit.
And even with
further.
all these methods, and what is it for? That's what
Well-
kind of makes me think about, I guess, carrying on through the natural guild stack.
The whole deal, right, is zeitgeist.
But yeah, practicality,
Zeitgeist through neglect.
100%. Yeah.
So
No,
zeitgeist through neglect
that's completely correct.
is where we started off. What's the point? The point is that the zeitgeist points towards us being coerced beyond any reasonable limit.
Right.
What's the point? How to live life without feeling like all you are is coerced, like everything is for something else. How to bring back meaning to the self in a clearly meaningless mechanism that is everything
Right.
but for the self.
Yeah, no, I
So
totally get it.
What's the goal? The goal is to at least get there,
You're
and then
absolutely right.
and then
At least in the fact that high up on the natural guild stack is way too ambitious for the book, and we've already discussed just what we need out of
right.
out of the arc.
Right. So,
Right, so,
so
yeah.
computation, synthetic neural networking, and sentient machine is the pie in the sky topic that is more appropriate.
Yeah,
to
that's
the-
later books. Yeah.
that is more appropriate for like the accelerationist element of the discussion, because that's kind of like that latter part. If the first part succeeds, that's
Right.
that's
One
the
step at a
trajectory.
time.
That's the trajectory.
Obviously,
But what we need to get to is
we're
at
looking
least
at
economy and
the
trade.
bare minimum. And yes, as to what I was saying, like this needs to be practical. There needs to be something happening. People organizing. To what purpose?
Yeah.
At a minimal, we're talking economy, trade.
So computation is definitely that step up that
I think
goes
so.
beyond
I
the
agree.
practicality points.
Then you're into like how do you actually create an ontology and ontologies interacting, and like how do you let go of terms or have terms be fluid, and recognizing that each neural net has its own perspective completely, its own history, context. Every single word doesn't mean what somebody else thinks it does, right? Like
There's
to me,
that.
when I think computation, like this is an interaction of like domain namespace domains. Of like this is a meaning in this context of this is what I think. So if we're both going to be in that same environment context, running the same protocols, that's
it's just a continuum of
the language of the domain, right?
It's just a continuum of our plateau. If it was hand into what you would call the successful guild, right? Like so, the scenario is we can't go below the plateau. We already have computers. We already have synthetic neural. We have machine learning, is what I'm saying. What would it look like in the hands of the guild? That is basically the question that those layers answer. Are they the most important subject? No, they're not. But what they are for actually is basically to go a step further in seeing how the lower tiers of explanations are justified to begin
Yeah.
with as well. The top-down part.
Right, like when I'm thinking about that kind of stuff, it's all integrated. It's not. It's not.
You're not
different.
gonna get it. You're not gonna get it.
It seems more advanced. Like course-wise, this would be like level 2 or something.
Oh yeah. Like,
You know. And as far as setting up a book, yeah, we just want to imagine in the gilding of the ontological matrix, right? What is the space used for?
hmm
How do we even justify that, right?
And the other thing I think is worth noting is, though the computation kind of stuff and going all the way to synthetic machine, or a sentient machine rather, it, without a proper grounding in the rest of the discussion, it sounds a lot like transhumanism, right? Like as soon as you say something like sentient machine, you're probably thinking Terminator robot,
Right.
robots walking around, right?
Obviously.
So it's important to note that when the idea came up, this wasn't really part of the thought process, and the idea is more like finding programming that is embedded in the human mind, who we are also kind of counting as a synthetic neurological computational device, in that it can the mind can process information besides itself, right? So we already have access to that since time immemorial. And,
Right.
and the more useful discussion to actually have here is, how does such a machine learning network such as our brain can come to formulating a full-blown mythology that is perfectly reflecting the layers that precede it, right? And from that perspective, we call that also the sentient machine, again grounded in the fact that our minds are built up of mechanical-like properties as well. So the question is not how do we become better machines, but rather how do we utilize the mechanics we already have, to put them all together into a better way of facilitating the rest of the discussion that we've been talking about. So from that perspective, the human society itself is also the sentient machine. So yes, there's a lot of room to explore there for the interested, but it's such a pie in the sky subject that it can go in so many different directions that it's not the most useful discussion unless we're talking about where does it all lead to after the points that we are making.
Good question. I'm always about that.
So like you're saying, your book has a definitive point where it wants to like drive
It
into.
has to.
But we
Yep.
both know that the model doesn't stop there. that secondary exploration, that's both technological and mental and and reflective of so many different
But I think
aspects.
I agree with the delineation. So far, what I'm seeing, like with the natural guilds landing on
And it's the three last guilds, so it's the fourth one out.
on trade, right? As far as just being able to get to like, what does this gilding do? What happens there?
How does it concretely look like from the inside and the outside? We've
Yeah.
discussed a lot of the inside. From the outside, the trade membrane is where the question of ownership comes into play. So one of the things that comes with membership, and I mean that by insight, not by awareness.
Fiat?
So
Or wait.
no, you got to go through the degrees
Sorry,
of progress.
insight and awareness. Okay, okay.
You got to go through the
Say
degrees
that
of
again,
progress.
though.
The
Membership by.
insight. So you have the insight of what membership is. Therefore, because of that insight, everybody is a
Right,
member
right,
one
okay,
way or
yeah,
the
yeah.
other. You
I like
stop
that.
seeing the delineation.
So that's the first time I've probably ever heard you utilize those terms in that way, which is,
Oh.
was in open and inclusive type of language. Right.
I tried to do that before, I believe, but
Yeah.
maybe I failed.
You've never, I don't think ever used that way.
So-
But yeah, cool. Yeah.
So yeah,
A
like
member by insight. There's member by insight. What are the other? Gotta look them up.
I forgot what the tangent was. The what I was building up to. So what did I say before that? Because that.
Well, we were talking about gilding, I guess, and the. Like that's I was at least trying to like, kind of. Ground things to the idea of having a space, an environment, physical. You're talking about ownership too, and like ownership being a problem. Ownership coming up
Yes, yes.
when you
I
start
was-
trade guild.
So the problem is this: inside the guild, ownership is not really meaningful, right?
Not a part of the calculation.
Outside the guild,
Not supposed to be.
outside of the guild,
By definition,
however,
it's not.
outside of the guild, however, you have a system
Through the membrane. Then we're into capital.
Yes.
We're capital
So
commodification.
so past that membrane, what you have is a system that records what each individual member of the guild is in possession of. So you
Right.
have the discrepancy.
Yes.
On the
Which is
on the
fine.
one side it doesn't matter. On the other side it matters. It's the only thing that really matters, right? So the trades guild is really to draw that line of saying, how does that work? Now I don't have specific ideas as to like how to divide it all out, because you start getting into problems of being communist, basically, right? So you can't start doing that.
Well, and we were talking
so,
about like trade guild having this idea of that
insight.
there's a whole what is filling the need.
This is why needs to be that insight, because it is the property of the insight that says, I do not own this, in the same way that the system says, I own this.
Right.
So it's insight
Yeah, okay.
that
The
parts,
interface.
that say parts you from the physical object as a possession, and as something that is available to
Right.
cover a demand somewhere as being a supply.
And by technically allowing that, the entire environment is transformed by the guild.
Yeah.
This is the interface.
If in case it's
the
not obvious,
the owner is what kind of is where that bridge happens.
and in case that's not obvious, what I'm describing is the self.
That's what Rush meant.
Gift economy was prior to the feast economy.
I always
taking
hated that
over.
lyric by Rush. It's like, and those of us in the highest places must be the ones to start to mold a new reality closer to the heart. It's like the ones in the high places. But that's the owners, right? The system is of ownership.
This is what charlatanism does, because it's piggybacking on grand mastery itself, which is the highest places, but turns what the highest place is completely away from grand mastery and just talks about some kind of shit being that high place. So there is,
Right.
so we all
As
get
if the
sucked
rest
in.
of the song is a big.
So we all get
something
sucked in
higher.
because we know about that higher place, but the one that we're talked about isn't the one that
Yep.
is being
And
felt.
did Rush change anything?
It's pure charlatanism right in its core.
I'm
You never know.
I'm not saying Rush is.
I
Because
never liked
I don't know where they
I never
came
liked
from.
that lyric, but when you think about it in terms of transition and emergence, capital is about ownership, right? So that's our plateau. Everybody owns. So on top of that, right,
Well,
there's
yeah.
something else can emerge, right?
So-
Like that's what we've been talking about.
Yeah, but that top thing looks like computation and sentient machine, not and pretty much the
Right.
subject of nobody's interest.
Right.
And the reason being is that you got to get through that trade threshold, and then once you get through the trade threshold, where you basically are converting all owned things into non-owned things, where do you go from there? The system is like, fuck you, we're not going anywhere because we're not doing that.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean?
You always have to take care of what's below. Doesn't matter how dirty the sewer is.
But you you know what I'm saying? Like, why trade is like this fundamental to the entire process is because it needs to take that systemic response of fuck you, no, everybody is an owner, to put a
Right,
shit
yeah,
behind
yeah,
this
yeah.
and says, okay, yes,
Okay, yeah, yeah.
this whole thing, we own all of those things, so you can't tell us what to do.
You're
By your own
delineating.
fucking rules.
Correct.
Fuck you.
Yeah, you're delineating concretely, understand.
It's copy left. It's the same idea. It's to use copyright law against itself.
Right.
Thou shalt not restrict any copyability of itself.
Well, owners are owners. Period.
By my ownership rights, I dictate the parameters, right?
Yep. Sorry.
So, just a
Demand
small
for training.
Yes, a small detail that was neglected in the discussion on corporations and the institute is that we mentioned how corporations can have, say, a demand for a workforce, and well, the whole cycle starts with demand for things to be done, right? Corporations are there to supply it, but then it comes up that, well, they need people to do the supplying, so they create a demand for the workforce to do the supplying, which in turn creates a demand for training, because for the skills that are being demanded by the corporations, right?
Sure.
There is now open spots for people to train based on that demand. So a supply of people of skilled people can supply that, and so on and so on. The chain goes, and so it's kind of like a flip flop between demand and supply, where a demand becomes a supply and supply becomes a demand, and on it goes. And so really, the entire point of having an entire guild of economics is to not keep track of this, but to protocolize, if you will, that happenstance of supply and demand, or however it manifests itself, and give structure to
So
understand it.
You mean like we were talking about having a driver plug-in, so that driver training to be a driver, there's like that would be something that could be demanded, and you'd think could be supplied with certain media easily, certain interactions to just understand the environment. Understand the environment.
Training would be the supply. So once a person is trained, he now can plug himself into and provide whatever skilled labor that is
It's
otherwise demanded by other
plugin.
corporations to create to fulfill a supply for whatever it is that's they're responsible for.
Driver dashboard.
With this fuzziness of how things come into being and whatnot, one of the things that is interesting here is that it creates, ideally, this is ideally it creates a voluntary work effort rather than a coerced one. So people are doing things because they just want to do things. They go out, they seek out what needs to be done, they participate in that skillfully and accomplish it. What it also creates is a space for today it's you, tomorrow it's me, the third day it's them, and as long as
That's
you
fine,
can
yeah,
maintain
yeah.
context,
It's understandable, but it
the
immediately
process is
makes
done.
you think about unraveling the current supply chains.
Well, yes, and at
And
the
across
same
the world, you have to work for money, obviously, to get things shipped across the world to you. That's how we survive.
well, that's
So obviously,
that comes
we
back
must
to
be
that comes back to
talking
the
about something
that
different.
comes back to the job of the trade guild. The trades guild's job is to ensure that that there is enough in the inner environment for that to be the case. It's its entire job, literally, is to use the economic battlefield, if you will, with the external world to ensure that all of the supplies from the core of the institute are somehow capable of being supplied. It's not an easy job, and it's definitely, in this case, it would basically require rich memberships, if you will, to actually protect, to
Well,
do,
that's-
to do,
that's
to do
kind
the
of
kind
what I
of
was-
protection that the level of protection that you're thinking of.
I had that thought.
It has to have that
And
component.
speaking of tall orders,
And so
right,
somehow,
who is truly
we must speak to the middle class then.
who is truly disjoined from the market?
The middle class who has enough time on their hands to contemplate this. Which is actually kind of a perfect storm for it. Because this is the most capable class of doing that kind of protection.
It's always was supposedly
They have enough.
like that, right?
They have enough, and combined they have more than enough. But talking to that particular class,
Oh man.
because this isn't the class that is sitting in the bowels of the zeitgeist, if you will, the shittiest part of it.
Right.
It's
This
doing the
is-
digesting part.
We are talking about the point, like class theory, whatever, I guess, that as economy gets worse, let's say, conditions, this most able...
You mean living conditions?
This most able group will find out the very last that shit has hit the fan, and that something must be done. So that's the
generally hits
that's
them
the
the
irony,
hardest.
like the
It
flip
hits
side.
them the hardest because they all of a sudden find themselves in poverty.
Because there's so much to lose, that's why. Think about it.
I did. I said they end up in poverty. Ayn Rand is a classic fucking example of that shit happening. She got stripped of all their wealth, their middle class wealth in Russia. They moved to the U.S. and she spent her entire fucking life ranting against coordinated efforts of taking possessions from other people, and that's what made her such an objectivist to begin with. Her shit got taken by a coercive force, not a. There was no. See, that's the thing. Look, with membership, they're not coerced. Your membership is expressed by the input, right, itself. Like, there's no attachment to the object. There is just the function of
Objectivism
it.
as like a correction to the trauma of like the state that she felt, the wrong state. So objective
Solipsism.
being the super right state.
It's a solipsism to emotive forces. She basically made the case her entire life that any decision that has an emotional component attached to it is now non-rational.
Right.
and the rest of it flowed from there. And basically, the outflow of that was that anything non-rational is bad, the,
Okay.
not to be entertained.
So, on the contrary, actually, she was feeling this revolution as a giant emotional force of the people overcoming the state.
Go ahead and
which should be
explain
perfect.
that. Go ahead and explain that contradiction to somebody who's so vested in the way they explain things the particular way. But no, I am rationalizing my way out of it. But why are you rationalizing your way out of it? Because it's rational. Is that what you feel? Like you can't talk.
Classic
with that
disconnect.
response.
Hmm.
Like
Lots of traps.
I've injected the notion that the only in our atheism, I sometimes do my smirk thing. I'm smirking at the time.
Karma
is what I'm
whoring?
saying. No, I lose karma there.
Gaining points.
I'm
Okay.
losing them there.
You take one for the team. Thanks,
Yeah,
buddy.
I always say things like, "Well, isn't your attachment to rationalism kind of emotional?" Like,
Yeah, it seems
like
like-
it feels good to be right, doesn't it?
Hmm.
They don't get that fucking point. That the reason that there is an pull
Such a
towards
pull.
being rational
Such a
is
pull.
because there's a dopamine hit after the fact when you solve the puzzle,
Mhm.
and it's not rational
And being contradicted feels bad.
because there's shit you don't need to think about that will just like drive you insane.
You've already won. You're right. Hmm.
So yeah.
Well, we've taken quite the meandering path.
I honestly hope
Fairly
that
directed, though.
I honestly hope that this gives you enough of a picture as to what the guild looks like concretely, where the difficulty is in binding its fuzziness to the eternalistic walls of the building, so that it's still
Right.
going to be bubbling
That's
inside.
a
For example,
contradiction.
that the economy guild is the thing that actually is doing the activities, while the trade guild is sitting there going, okay, how do I translate all of this ephemeral stuff to some kind of record that the system understands?
For like interfacing outwardly,
Yeah.
especially.
Which in layman's terms translates to a whole bunch of people with money saying, nah, I'm not going to play the same game
Right.
as the system.
How do you
So-
make it happen, anyways?
So yeah, that's the tallest order of them all, convincing people with things that the things that they have aren't theirs; they're just things.
But also ownership as a fundamental of capitalism, you could say. I bet, right?
Well,
so like
so
we
ownership
all
is
do
interesting.
own things, quote unquote.
Oh.
But on top of that, can be this release of ownership in a sense at a higher level to the guild, if you will, and that's what we've been
But the
talking
thing is,
about.
this is the only way the system understands it. If you release it to the guild,
We're not talking about outside of the system. We're talking the only way the system understands it, right?
Yeah. So, and the other thing is that how do you paint this picture without saying you must give up your possessions, because that's not the statement.
No.
Because
This
at
is
the
a
end of the
very
day, it's the
important point.
insight. It's the insight element.
And the word transition is a very good word. And transition implies that nothing is ever permanently or completely moved from one way to another. It's an allowing of
Evolution.
transaction, of evolution, if you will.
Well, no, evolution is the right word, because
It should be the right word.
everything is evolving.
Right.
The reason we have shifts in circumstance and context is because they're evolving.
And if they're not, it's dead.
Each moment
and this is
feeds
a,
into the
this is
next.
a deadly trap when we become stuck in our models, right? So this
Lack of
fundamentally has to be part of it. This is
So,
like education level.
so another reason for why the fuck we're doing this is that our mentalics, if you will, mental masturbation, whatever, we have a tendency to think of like once we're born, we're like whatever the evolutionary process placed us in. That's the rest of it, right? We're the human. We've evolved to be human.
We get born into a culture. The culture is picked up.
So the argument for what we're doing is basically this: your mentalics are part of the evolutionary process, right? So like it's not the case that you were born and now you're stuck in a state, in a particular state. It's the life is shifting, life is moving, life is ongoing.
Right.
Your mental constructions, all to do with whatever's in your brain, is evolving with moment to moment changes. So the point being is that how do you keep your mind evolving while being as stagnated by the plateau and all it presents? Like you can't go beyond these points. How do you ignore that, if you will? How do you
It's a
not
big
listen to that?
dissonance to try hold on
Have
to.
a last beer.
But of course. And we're almost at the end of today's live stream development meeting.
Yep.
I believe it's been grand.
I hope I gave you enough to like give you the end point.
We're progressing, man. We're progressing.
Because I don't know what else.
And what do we got left?
What else do you think you'll need to know where the book is heading
Yeah, we got minutes, if anything.
that you don't think we can leave out without speaking about it explicitly? Because at this point we've covered the bubbling up, and we've covered how that is
My only
supply and demand,
thinking
and how that's
is-
covered by more.
My only thinking that we haven't gone quite to it is where you have this guilding or whatever. It's like it is a guild, and then you have these different offices, like the archetype, the state archetype, and
So
all
the
that.
details.
Just even the fact of that there are different offices, and what if it's so simple that it's only one person running that?
So you know what? Why don't we try to address at least the idea of what and why we have offices for, right? Like, so
There's a
the
structure
the
existing.
The corporate world has offices. We have offices. We're coming
Right.
at it from down below, and
Sure. But
we
it's a
arrive
parallel.
At that, we arrive at that parallel.
It's
yeah.
a parallel of there being organization of people together to create something that you can't see with your eyes.
So one aspect of it,
but it exists.
one
anyways.
aspect of this is to show the external world that this is a real corporate structure. So to cement that in their view of
Right.
the model. The other thing, the other counterpart to
and
it
that's
is that
ownership interface.
the other counterpart is that our offices are not based on those assumptions that
Right.
they're talking about.
You set up the plateau, the like clean slate, and build up.
Using their words.
Mhm.
And so what we've done is we tried to create similar sounding offices as you find in the corporate world, but ones that directly reflect the archetypical structure of the APS.
Right.
To
the
capture
things-
to capture potentiality.
Kind of like the roles that need to be taken on to watch over a structure.
to watch over pure potentiality itself. Sort of like
In context of a structure.
Mhm.
Your office is for this structure. It's not for any other.
Right. So the bridge is basically being able to address things that always happen with things that are happening right now in whatever activity you're in. And so That's where we have this injection of ideology going in, with uncertainty being the most fundamental element in office that needs to address the fact that entropy is playing a role, and then we have offices that
Right, just dealing with what needs to be done to keep something alive, quote unquote, in the world, existing as this heavenly entity, an organization that nobody can see or smell or taste, but it's there.
Right.
That this is the stack that does that.
Yeah, so to have
This is beyond natural guilds of just a self-reflection describing like who we are or kind of thing, right? In generic. This is specifically a stack about an organization of people together.
and what that organization is going to encounter on its process of living as an organization. So,
Uncertainty.
and this is why, like, it tracks back to those archetypes. It's going to have to deal
Right.
with uncertainty. It's going to
At
have
the
to
lowest
deal
level,
with entropy. It's going to
as
have
an
to,
organization going through time, things are going to shift below it. The shifting sands, the under your feet, right?
So to deal with, say, uncertainty, it's going to have a way to manage risk.
And
to deal with entropy.
We've got about a minute, and I think we've
To deal with
dived
yeah.
nicely.
To deal with entropy, it's going to have an office for discovering value proposition, because values change parameters.
And value is
and
like
so
energy.
proposition, right? So today the value proposition is one thing.
Like
Tomorrow
taking
it's
in
another.
negentropic, the base negentropic force of the corp.
It's going to have to deal with space and time, existing in a space, in a time. So it's going to have to deal with real estate. So there's an office to deal with
And so
specific
the
elements
book,
of that.
The book through its arc should help anybody to facilitate this type of organization.
What I'm trying to do is say that we have a kind of like a pseudo office for every facet
of
of
organization.
of potentiality, itself. One that we encountered through being alive and existing, which is why it makes it so abstract. But in the concrete sense, we got
and again constrained to the natural guilds, as this is what is actual constitutes order existing.
yeah. So what we basically have is like an officer.
And I can't go any farther than about 10 seconds.
We
So
have an officer essentially to tackle each actual archetype from the perspective
Officer, role.
of the organizational structure, such that it can plug into other organizational structures and speak the same language of this
the
exact
bigger
same
picture, yes. We're
archetype
not getting to
stack.
that in the book, though.
Oh no.
But with that, what a night. Cheers, buddy.